You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
The Centresteer Podcast, a Land Rover podcast by Land Rover owners. This is the Centresteer Podcast, the first Land Rover podcast on the planet. Centresteer is a podcast by, for, and about Land Rover owners. Welcome to show number 67 for October 2018. I'm your host, John Kostic, here near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Joining me over Skype today is Harold. How you doing, Harold?
Oh, another day.
Turns out Mike and Morgan are kind of busy with work and unable to join us today. Our guest this month is Bristol Foster of Grizzly Torque fame. A month ago, we saw the story about Grizzly Torque, reached out to him, and he was graciously able to join us, and so we'll have that interview coming up later in the show. We are recording this a day after 11 people were killed at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. You know, our sympathy is with those affected. A very special thank you to our Patreon patrons. Your support really does help, especially with our domain management and website hosting. You can visit patreon.com/Centresteer for all the details and become a Patreon patron yourself. There's also a link from our webpage. Thanks for your likes, comments, follows on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and email. We did get a message over Facebook from Jay. He says, "Thanks for the podcast!" ! I listened to it either on the way to or going away from a Land Rover dealership. I've been working in a Land Rover parts for over 30 years, so that makes me a fan or completely absurd and demented, or both! !
I don't know. Sounds like a good way to support your addiction to me.
Exactly. And Jay said he had some ideas for guests. I haven't, but he didn't forward them on yet. So Jay, feel free to send on.
Great to have ideas. You might want to share them with us, though.
Exactly. And as a last-minute idea, we had podcast T-shirts printed up to sell at MAR, the Mid-Atlantic Rally. We're going to have them available to sell on our website once we find some time to figure it out, and also time to make it happen. They will make great holiday gifts. Hint, nudge, wink. Did you get yours yet, Harold?
Have you delivered me one?
I guess not. I think I need to do that. I'll have to.
You're the fulfillment center, so if you don't remember sending one to me, then the answer would be no.
That's right. Yes, out of the 110 fulfillment center.
See, now there you go. There's a hook. Buy our shirts, and they'll be delivered in a 110.
Shipping and handling fees will vary.
Unless you're willing to wait to the next event. Delivered entirely by the Underground Railroad in a freshly restored 110.
That's interesting. I like that. Although I do like the idea. I'll personally deliver the shirt or shirts to you. They'll be $20 American, but shipping and handling fees, of course, will apply. Defender gets about, 21 miles to the gallon diesel?
Yeah, I was going to say, for fuel and time, I'd deliver it anywhere in the continental U.S.
Well, you and I will take a road trip. Maybe that's what we'll do. Drive around, deliver T-shirts to all the good Land Rover fans.
Kind of sounds vaguely Christmas-like, doesn't it? An all-wheel drive sleigh.
Maybe.
Just don't ask it to fly, because that ain't going to happen.
No, not at all. No, it doesn't like to fly. Although probably should have got a painted red.
It's not the being airborne; it's the sudden reuniting with the Earth that concerns me.
Although probably should then have gotten it painted kind of a nice bright red instead of the blue. It would look more sleigh-like.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, let's get into the news then. So JLR monthly international sales have been impacted by China market uncertainty. So JLR reported total sales, retail sales of 57,114 vehicles in September 2018. That is down 12.3% year on year. So from the month of September of 2017 to compared to September of 2018. So it was down 12.3% despite strong sales for new models, including the Range Rover Velar and the Jaguar I-Pace and E-Pace. Sales in China declined 46.2% as ongoing market uncertainty resulting from the import duty changes and continued trade tensions held back consumer demand. That's where the China's changing their import duty on vehicles from 25% to 15%. So it sounds like people were waiting for that to happen and then say
that's a big chunk of change. So yeah, if I thought my overall price was going to drop by 10%, yeah, I'd wait.
Yeah, absolutely. Wouldn't you? You're going to save 10% at least, right?
10% is 10%, and on something as Land Rovers ain't cheap no more. So yeah, that's a lot of money.
So the question, and I didn't see this anywhere, does that import duty affect newly imported vehicles, or is it like retroactive to the ones that are already in the country?
Well, I mean, normally the import duty is paid at the time of import.
That's what I figured. I'm wondering if JLR are going to do then with the ones that are already in the country.
They're already paid for. They got to try and sell them somehow.
JLR sales were down a modest 0.8% in the UK and 4.7% in Europe, which saw large industry declines of 20.5% in the UK and 31% in Germany, primarily related to the timing of the, I should have read this ahead of time, WLTP homologation rules, as well as reduced diesel demand. I have no idea what that WLTP is. I should have looked that up. Then again, I thought Michael would join us since it's from his article.
Yeah, he's usually the nerd on that stuff, and plus it does come from his site. So, now, did you say it was 0.8% down in the UK or 8%?
0.8% in the UK.
0.8. All right.
Yes, and 4.7 in Europe.
Almost insignificant statistically.
Yes, although the way the article reads here that there were large industry declines of 20% in the UK and 31% in Germany. So I guess compared to the industry, JLR didn't do so bad.
Right, yeah.
In North America, sales were 6.9% lower, largely reflecting lower industry sales, which were down 5.5% industry-wide, reduced incentives on Jaguar sedans, although although Land Rover had a record September with sales up 7.3. So, so basically JLR sales were down because of Jaguar. Strong sales of new models, including the electric I-Pace, the E-Pace, and the Range Rover Velar helped offset slower sales of older models such as the Evoque and the Discovery Sport, and I would guess the Jaguar sedans.
Interesting that the Evoque now gets lumped into the older model category.
There is a new one coming up. There is a Series 2 coming up. JLR plans a 2-week closure as demand falls. So JLR is planning a 2-week shutdown of its Solihull plant at the end of October, just in a few days here. Britain's biggest car maker blamed weakening global demand, especially in China, and has faced falling diesel sales in recent months. JLR said employees at the West Midlands plant would be paid for the duration of the shutdown and no jobs would be lost. The Unite union called the news deeply troubling and said government policies were to blame. Unite National Officer Des Quinn said, quote, government ministers' trashing of diesel, despite the UK making some of the cleanest engines in the world, combined with the shambolic handling of BREXIT, is damaging the UK car industry and the supply chain.
Shambolic, I like that.
Added into the mix the government's half-hearted support of the transition to electric and alternatively powered cars, and you have a triple whammy facing the UK cars workers, unquote.
Well, the significant thing there is if people aren't buying in China, that now has just a huge effect everywhere.
Yes,
because they've become such a big consumer.
Absolutely.
Well, they are what we used to be.
The Solihull plant, where the firm makes Range Rover and Jaguar models, will close from 22 October, which actually was last week. Follows a move to a 3-day week for 2,000 workers at the firm's Castle Bromwich plant, and an announcement in April to lay off 1,000 workers across its West Midlands plants. The UK car industry has been struggling in recent months as diesel sales fall. Car makers face tougher emission standards. And finally here, and in September, BMW said it would have to shut the Mini factory in Oxford for a month after Brexit if the UK failed to secure a trade deal with the bloc. So it's not just JLR facing issues.
No, it's everybody.
Yeah. And speaking of Brexit, JLR CEO, hard Brexit could spark huge job losses. So I want to say Spaeth, right? What's his first name?
Ralph.
So Ralph Spaeth said, according to The Guardian, that the outcome would lead to the closure of plants and major job losses, adding some exposed industries would have, quote, no way to survive a hard Brexit, unquote. Further, he said, everybody can do the maths. It's very open and very transparent. It is not only a Jaguar Land Rover, but is also an element for the supply industry and export industry in the UK. It will be very, very critical. If we say a hard Brexit or no deal, companies will disappear, plants will be closed. There's no way to survive a hard Brexit for many industries. But I hope again that the politicians see it and act for the benefit of their own population, unquote.
Well, we're already seeing that too with the closures, the temporary closures.
Yeah, I think that's rattling of the cage, so to speak, letting people know that things are happening. Plus, you have the downturn and the pause in purchasing in China. You have
right.
Uncertainty here in the U.S. with the market and possibly tariffs even coming. On a JLR-related area, this is it's very short. I'll read the whole thing. JLR loses marketing head amid restructure. So as part of an internal restructuring that began in May, JLR's global head of advertising, Ian Armstrong, has left the company. On LinkedIn, Armstrong has posted that work is an activity and not a destination, and that it is, and that at this time he is, quote, independently contemplating, advising, and investing. You should try it, unquote. Before working at JLR, Armstrong held high-level marketing positions at Honda Motor Europe.
I wonder if this will mean that they're going to change directions in their marketing campaigns.
That was kind of that was what I was kind of wondering myself. I mean, they seem to have had very.
Well, the question is whether he quit because he was unhappy there, or whether they got rid of him because they're unhappy with his results.
I think the bigger question is, what is this internal restructuring all about? Don't think we've heard about that before. What is this? What is this internal restructuring? What's that about?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's kind of a vague term. I mean, a lot of things can be restructured that don't really change the way you do anything. They just do it more efficiently. But sometimes restructurings can be a big deal, but sometimes they're not. So we don't know what that means.
Or it could be covering up for the fact that they just wanted this one guy gone, and they call it internal restructuring. And
oh yeah, exactly. Right. That's why I say I'm curious to know why he left, and maybe it's something as innocuous as combining marketing, doing more stuff together between Jag and Land Rover, and they need fewer people to do it. I don't know.
On some positive news, JLR's Slovak plant has opened. JLR expects to reach annual production of 100,000 cars at its plant in Slovakia by 2020. The chief executive of the newly opened factory, Alexander Wartburg, said. The plant, which will take over production of the car's Discovery model, launched operations in September and held its official opening on Thursday, which was this past week. It was built at a cost of 1.4 billion euros, $1.6 million, with a maximum capacity of 150,000 vehicles.
That actually sounds like a reasonable price for a car factory.
I guess maybe for a modern one, because that's, I'm sure. I don't.
Well, I'm sure they're not going to build an antiquated one.
Well, right. I guess
a modern plant with the modern efficiencies costs some money, but I mean, it costs less to run in the long run. So you spend more up front to spend less along the way.
And you don't have a lot of people running it. It's a lot of
a lot of robots.
A lot of robots, and a couple people to tend to them.
Right. Little guy with an oil can that comes along and squirts oil on the robots.
They don't have a robot to squirt oil on the other robot?
Next year.
Okay. There we go. They'll work on that.
Then they'll have no people.
Well, yes. Resources go in one side, and out comes a rolling vehicle on the other, right?
Although I guess they replace the guy with the oil can with a robot, then they have to have a guy come in to oil the robot that oils the robots.
Now, what happens when they start making autonomous driving vehicles, and those are made in autonomously producing factories?
Did you not see the Terminator?
Thank you. That's where it's going. JLR Rover Classic canceled plans for Savannah Center. So they announced, only about a month ago that they were...
Yeah, that was a hard about face.
It was. The spokesman, Chris Hallett for JLR, said they were very disappointed. They had and specifically said they had a 46% drop in sales in China, anti-diesel rhetoric in Europe, and an upcoming drop in the import tax China charges are all factors Jaguar had to consider.
Yeah, if this had been 6 months ago, this would have been the mother of all April Fool's jokes. But, it's sad to see that, the stuff with the Brexit and China especially has a ripple effect on us. We're not China and we're not Europe, we're not England, but all those little factors, cause the company to need to dial back their expenditures on everything, and that has a ripple effect on us.
Well, especially as the company is trying to become a worldwide brand and diversify and produce 1 million cars a year. I think isn't that their goal, which put them.
Well, mind you, the Classic Works does nothing to support that. That's
No.
restoration and maintaining the older stuff, which I would still think would be great to have here. But if they can't afford to do it because they're not making enough money elsewhere,
that was my point. Yes, exactly. Those, as you said, those other things going on in the rest of the world, all these pressures on them, and this is kind of a luxury item, and something had to give. This would be the one.
Yeah.
Especially,
ruins are fun, though.
It does. Of course, they said that they will restart the idea if their financial conditions improve, which is good to hear. Interesting thing about China that I don't think I'd heard before regarding JLR. It says that JLR manufactures about half the vehicles it sells in China at a plant there, and it imports the other half. I don't think we'd heard that stat anywhere before. So they, just to refresh that or remind us of it, so in China, JLR produces half the cars in country, and then they import the other half.
Right. I wonder if they're planning on changing that mix as a tariff avoidance thing or not.
Or waiting to see what happens with BREXIT as far as...
Or waiting to see what happens with BREXIT, which we're getting tired of hearing that phrase. We're waiting to see what happens. Just let's get it over with. Well, whatever's going to happen, let's just make it happen so we can get on with our lives. However, if we can get them to revisit the idea of the Classic Works USA, we need to lobby to have it in Western PA.
That'd be a good idea. It would be an appropriate location for many reasons.
Right. Yeah.
Future news, JLR recently sent out its self-driving Range Rover to tackle what it says is one of the UK's most challenging road layouts. The vehicle did come back. There was a short video. You can watch that. It's about a minute long. The modified Range Rover Sport has been in development for a number of years. Its first trials on public roads took place in 2017, and this time they sent it out with 2 engineers aboard, but this was an completely autonomous vehicle, and it drove around Coventry on its own. That was on-road, of course, not off-road.
Right.
Although they're working on that too. This story is general, not specific to Land Rover, but this was submitted by Herald, actually. New study shows that diesel cars are much cleaner than most electric vehicles. So I pulled out a couple appropriate paragraphs here. The electric cars do not release carbon emissions, but the problem lies in the production of the lithium-ion batteries. The energy required to make the cells result in a higher carbon footprint. It is so high that the automotive experts have estimated that an electric vehicle in Germany would take more than 10 years to break even with an efficient combustion engine's emissions. Dr. Jan Borgard, managing partner at BREXIT, said in a statement, quote, electric cars appear to be the panacea and reduce emissions by 35%. After all, electric vehicles do not emit any carbon dioxide while driving. At least it is widely held opinion, unquote. Further.
Well, and that's the thing. They always talk about electric vehicles being zero emissions, and they're not, because you still have to generate that electricity, unless you've got solar or something else. But I call them remote emissions vehicles because there's carbon being emitted somewhere to put the energy into that car.
Borgard further added, quote, however, from well to wheel, they do not improve the situation. After all, electricity generation, including for electric cars, is still strongly dependent on fossil fuels in many EU countries. The climate does not care whether carbon dioxide comes from the exhaust pipe or whether it is released when lignite is burned to generate electricity or an energy-intensive battery production, unquote. The study states...
Exactly what I said.
And the study states that building a 500-kilogram EV car battery or bigger in a fossil-fueled factory will result in 74% more carbon emissions than producing a traditional vehicle. Borgard says that it is time to consider the diesel approach if the world wants to reach the environmental targets of 2030 EU CO2.
Yeah, that's a concept known as embodied cost. There is a big environmental impact in making stuff. And so making electric vehicles has a much bigger impact on the environment than making a conventional vehicle with an internal combustion engine. And they're saying diesel here because, diesel's under attack. But, the embodied cost in producing a gasoline vehicle versus a diesel vehicle is pretty much the same. It's real close. But, of course, then the diesel is better when you're operating it because it's producing less. But the embodied cost of production is much less than electricity, and that's the take home here.
What's not in this article, and I don't know if you know this, did they consider the cost of making and obtaining the fuel, the carbon fuel itself? Because sounds like that should also be factored in. If you're factoring the cost of generating electricity, should you not also factor in the cost of creating the fuel that's going to run these vehicles?
Well, if you really want to be thorough about it, you need to the production costs need to include the cost of producing the materials, be it for an electric vehicle and all the special exotic stuff that goes into those batteries, or just mining the iron and aluminum and such that it takes to produce it, plus the energy of producing it, the energy of transporting those materials from where they're dug out of the earth to where they're put together, the energy involved in transporting that vehicle to where it's sold. All that stuff needs to go into consideration. And like you're saying, the total cost, and I'm using the word cost, I mean environmental costs, if you will, in this case, of producing the fuel involves mining you're mining the materials that are used to produce the electricity, and the cost of producing the power plant. That has a big environmental cost. Building a power plant, building more power plants to make more electricity for the increased demand because of the vehicles has an environmental impact. And then on the other side, of course, like you say, the cost of extracting the fossil fuels from the earth for, be it diesel or gasoline or whatever, the oil production has an environmental cost as well. So if you really want to be thorough about it, I've not seen a study quite that thorough, but you really got to look at all the different phases on both sides of the story. But I mean, ultimately, the thing that I've said for a long time is that, the embodied cost in producing any new vehicle is so steep that you're better off driving the one you already have, even though it may emit more than a new one, because it'll take years to break even on that.
I think the point to take here is if you look at the progression of development of internal combustion engines,
Mm-hmm.
the electrically driven vehicles are at the point where maybe 75 years ago where engines were. I mean, so there is that kind of like development cycle, and I think we're at the beginning of.
Well, the interesting thing there is 100 years ago, electric vehicles were popular. And they were in fact in some ways more popular than they were more popular than diesel. Diesel wasn't big in cars yet. It was just a few industrial applications back then. But they were popular, especially marketed to women, because you didn't have to get out and crank the engine over to get it started. But they went out of style pretty quickly because of battery technology, which we still don't have enough energy density in the modern batteries we have. But
Exactly.
Back then it was much worse. But
right, and that's what I'm saying. Is it seems like battery technology almost was arrested at that point, and it didn't pick back up again until probably the 90s.
It became a lot easier just to use gasoline because it was there.
So hopefully, it seems that people are working on this, trying to get better efficiency out of batteries. They're working on the problem, I guess. So
I think that that's maybe the one good thing that comes out of this legislation that bans internal combustion. I see it being rolled back a few times before it's finally done, but I think by doing that you force people to spend the money to develop better electric technology. Yeah. But we still have a long way to go, and I think that's really the big take home from this, is that just because something's electric doesn't mean it's clean yet.
Right. It's not complete. Maybe a better way to put that is it's not completely clean. You're only looking at one part.
Right. It's not as clean as you think, because there's still production costs, and we need to work on better, more environmentally friendly ways to build electric cars, and better, more environmentally friendly materials. And in the meantime, diesel is still better than electricity, so why not continue to use it for as long as we can? I mean, and diesel and gasoline technologies continue to get better. It's not like you can just lump them off as universally dirty and bad because we have this new great savior of electricity.
Moving on to our favorite vehicle that's coming up, the new 2020 Land Rover Defender Spied testing on public roads. So I
wish it was my favorite. I'd like it to be my favorite.
We don't know yet, Harold.
That's just it. We don't really know what it's going to be quite yet.
You will like it, Harold. You will.
It's going to be appealing.
So this made a big splash at the beginning of the month, and I'll read a good part here of Autocar.
In fact, right after we finished on last month's episode, this came out.
The new Land Rover Defender has been spied testing on public roads for the first time as development of the rugged 4x4 ramps up ahead of its going on sale in 2020. The pictures show the new Defender in camo livery on the roads near the Jaguar Land Rover factory. Asked about the images at the Paris Motor Show, Felix Brottergem, JLR's marketing chief,
sorry, Felix,
admitted they were of the first prototype.
Sorry, if you're listening, I'm sorry. We butcher names here.
Yes, I do apologize. JLR's marketing chief admitted they were of the first prototype to lead Gaydon. Is that lead? Is that right? Yeah, lead. Or is that supposed to be left, maybe? The article says to lead Gaydon. And said more would follow in coming months as the ramp-up to production begins. I think they meant left Gaydon.
Or leave.
Or leave. Actually, leave makes
to leave, yes.
It fits better. Quote, these are what we call pilot build cars, and testing will increase on public roads from now. The first 4 cars are ready, and now the line is running. You can expect the number of test cars to grow exponentially. In time, as you expect, the Defender will go through the usual test routines, from cold weather testing in Sweden to extreme hot weather testing in the Death Valley of the USA. It's exciting for us to now be one step closer to bringing the car to market, of course. We are talking about the rebirth of an icon, and not just a single car, but a whole family. Finishing up his quote here, our brand is about passion, and it is icons that drive that passion. The truth is the world doesn't need another premium brand doing what all others do. These icons are what separate us. At Land Rover, we are rooted in our heritage, and that's what makes us different, unquote.
Yeah, okay, whatever. So yeah, is this the new propaganda chief that replaced the one who just left?
I am going back to our articles to see what that gentleman's name who was ushered out. Yeah, he was the marketing head, so he was JLR's global head of advertising.
Okay.
Is that it?
And Felix is a marketing chief?
Well,
what's the difference?
I don't know. So the article we mentioned earlier that Mr. Armstrong, Ian Armstrong, was it says here JLR's, this is lowercase, global head of advertising. I don't know if that may or may not be important, so it just sounds like he was in charge of advertising. That may not have been his title.
Which I guess is different from marketing.
And then I suspect then that Felix is, now they say, in this article it says that Felix is JLR's lowercase marketing chief.
Okay. All right. So nobody's using actual titles. They're just using words.
Yeah. It's possible that Felix is Land Rover's marketing chief, not JLR's marketing chief. That's just a guess on my part. Anyway, if you look at further on about the new 2020 Defender, Felix said, I'm not going to say his last name because I'll screw it up. The one thing I can promise,
as history has proven,
the one thing I can promise you is that the new Defender will do all that our customers expect of it without being a copycat of what has gone before. It is a car for the modern.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't look like anything that's gone before it.
It is a car for the modern world, and that means that it must move the game on if it is to be relevant. We can confirm that customers around the world will begin taking delivery of and enjoying Defender again from 2020.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're going to like it. Uh-huh.
Did you see the photos? It's very
corporate property. Yeah, I did.
Boxy,
you know what it looks like to me? It looks like they took the DC-100 and rubbed it on a big block of sandpaper until they sort of flattened out some of the curves and sharpened up the edges.
I kind of like if this is it.
I mean, it's an improvement over the DC-100, yes, but I still see a lot of DC-100 in it.
Oh, well, yeah, I understand. I
mean, that's not to say it's bad necessarily. It's just, it's not my cup of whatever.
I think for a modern, if this is it, and it may have a lot of cladding on it to make it look more boxy, maybe than it really is. It certainly is unclear.
Well, that's true, and the camo there may be some shoulder pads, so to speak, under the camo wrap, but looking at confuse that. But, on the other hand, this is how you make a Discovery look like a Defender.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, meaning it is a disco. There's no way around that. So you put something that looks Defender-ish on the disco platform, and this is what you get.
I kind of like the look, I think. If this is what it's to be.
It could be worse. It could be worse.
I kind of like the boxiness of it. It does have that boxiness. Now, of course, it definitely does not have the upright windscreen that you would expect, but that's to be expected with improvement and maturation of the line.
Well, for airflow and pedestrian deflection purposes, you have to lean the windscreens back.
Right. And it does have wheel flares that come out, seem reminiscent. They're integral, but also reminiscent of the current Defender, or the old Defender, I guess.
The real Defender.
The real Defender. Or Defender 1, right?
Just the real Defender. We'll just leave it at that.
How about, well, I think we should say
proper Defender, to use the British term.
Well, this is going to probably be called New Defender, so then we just call the old one Defender. But if you look at the rear of it, it does appear to have a swinging tailgate, because there's a handle on one side, and it's in that position that it makes you appear as if it will have a side opening tailgate. And the lights look round,
as did the Disco, which but it doesn't now. So they kind of they kept that detail from the Defender, at least.
And I would hope that it's reversible. You could change it on either side. So if you're in a left side driving country versus
that has never been possible for 67 years. So if it is now, it's new.
Right, and I would hope they've planned for that, because that would make a lot of sense especially for the United States.
It would make life better, but I don't look for that to happen.
We'll see. I suspect that's probably integral and possible. The lights in the rear do look round, which is a nice thing to see.
That is a good thing, yes.
And, even though they may be covered up based on the cladding to make them look like they're round, so who knows?
Right, yeah, just put round holes in the tarp they threw over it. Yeah.
Right, but at least there's that chance that it has that. There's a better chance on it.
They're teasing us with the hope.
And they're in the right place in the rear, because they are middle of the vehicle. It's not up in the I guess the C pillar or D pillar, depending on how you look at it. They're actually at the midline where they currently are in the Defender. So there's some positivity there. Again, if this is it, I kind of like it. It feels like an improvement. It feels like a maturation of the current one.
Okay, well, let's see it without the dress on, and then we'll see what it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like. But at least from what we've seen so far, it kind of has an aggressive, I think, feel to it. Especially in a couple of the photos when they have it on the road, it does have a nice look to it.
But, to go back a couple of months to what Michael was saying, that either it's going to be lame or he's going to be blown away, I'm still caught in the middle somewhere. I'm neither blown away nor pissed at it.
And another article, when talking about the new Defender, and this is probably another important point to bring out, is that Land Rover promises a new Defender far more advanced. And Spaeth said to Car Advice, I think this was at an event,
how could it not be more advanced? It's just, like I said, it's shared platform. It's not going to take all the good stuff off the Disco for the Defender.
Well, he said, quote, "Technology is going to be mandatory in the new Defender. You simply can't build this kind of vehicle without it anymore.
You can't sell a car in this country without technology on it.
You can't achieve the emission levels, and you cannot achieve the CO2 levels required of the vehicles today," unquote.
Well, and you have to have stability control, and you have to have airbags. You have to have all these things that are electronically controlled. You need all this technology in order to legally sell in this country.
He went on further to say, but it'll also need to appeal to a much wider audience and adopt to a completely fresh design. Now, he didn't say this, but this is the article saying, contrary to the approach taken by the new Jeep Wrangler and Mercedes G-Class. Quoting Spaeth, he said, "I think it's a very interesting approach to keep design the same vehicle, but move ahead with new technology inside. But at the end of the day, it's only a halfway approach. To be really relevant while using the latest technology and to hit all our environmental targets, we can't keep looking back." Well, it's
no, and that makes sense. And they throw out Jeep and the G-Wagon as examples. And like we've said many times, Mercedes can afford to do whatever they want with the G-Wagon. That's a niche for them because they sell so many other cars.
Going on in the article, some interesting things to point out, where Land Rover sold over 9,000 Defenders in Europe in 2004. Sales dropped to around 1,000 per year in the earlier part of this decade. So I think it's something that I don't think we'd heard a lot about, was that sales of the Defender itself, while everyone loved it, it wasn't really selling that well towards the end of its run.
It was never a high volume vehicle. I mean, and they had announced the 2 millionth Defender right before production ended. I mean, not a little while, a few months before, and that number they included series truck production in that. So it's 67 years of production of this model lineage only netted 2 million vehicles. That's just not that many.
And if you look at the Car Buzz article, again, we'll have a link to that. They show the DC-100 concept, and it's nice to make the comparison between that and the Autocar, which has the what they believe to be the Defender, in its camo livery. But it's interesting to see the difference between the two.
Like I said, it just looks like they sanded off all the curves and sharpened the edges up.
It's interesting comparing it to the current Defender, the what's to be the new one. It's interesting to see the roof to be very boxy. Like they didn't, there's no capability there for Alpine windows. I'm not, it's kind of interesting, but we'll see.
Yeah, but the roof still kind of being boxy like it is kind of makes me feel a bit Defendery about it. I mean, yeah, there's no Alpines, but maybe the aftermarket takes care of that problem for us.
Or I mean, they can build angular glass now. They could still do it, and put in some sort of maybe call it something else, but put an Alpine window in there of some sort. It could be done, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So that is the new Defender. So related, McGovern didn't talk about the new Defender, but this was an Auto Express article, and I thought it was relevant. I mean, we like talking about Jerry, or at least we seem to, things that he has, because he's critical to Land Rover's design.
Well, we don't like talking about Jerry, but we do it.
Well, in some ways you have to. He's critical to what's happening. You'll notice he wasn't dismissed in the internal reshuffle, if there was such a thing. He's still there.
Right.
So that says something. So
yeah, well, the corporates like him because he's selling product. The stuff he's designed, even though we don't like it, it's selling.
Mike Rutherford with Auto Express talked to McGovern and some basically anecdotes. It's fair to say that Jerry McGovern, one of the top 5 car designers in the world, is deliberately and unapologetically provocative when he grabs his trusty box of crayons and creates new Land Rovers. For example, I once bumped into him in Los Angeles where he was temporarily homeless after being forced, quote unquote, to check himself out of a posh Hollywood hotel. How come? Because his room had a black bath, black taps, black tiles, which collectively were a, quote, design disaster, unquote, made worse by the fact that, unsurprisingly, he couldn't find the black soap. That's the thing about McGovern. The design and functionality of hotel bathrooms and 1,000,001 other non-automotive things seem as important to him as how his cars look and feel. Plus, when reactions...
You don't have to live there, dude. It's a one-night stand. Just take your dump in the dark and move on.
Specifically, he insists to me and my World Car Awards colleagues last week that he is not a car nut. Sure, he's into them, but he's equally into buildings, furniture, and clothes.
I can be with you on the buildings and furniture. The clothes I could give a rat's ass about, but
yes.
Okay, whatever.
He's not a car guy. Although, they did ask him, and this is where I may have something in common with Jerry. What's his favorite car? Do you any idea? Do you want to take a guess, Harold?
Well, if you want to talk about commonality with you, it would be the old Cutlass.
No, close. It is an old car. His favorite is a 1961 Continental by Lincoln, where he used to work. Why is it
not my favorite Lincoln, but the old Lincolns, I like those too.
I can see it. And they asked him, why is it the best ever? He said, quote, modern approach, level of sophistication, pared back, reductive approach, scale. It spoke to me. I can kind of see it.
Right.
Although he says he's not a car guy, but maybe it's more of a design thing.
Well, that's just it. The things he says, really have nothing to do with the car. He's a design guy. He's just speaking design language there. He likes the shape of it.
Although here's where we have something we agree, maybe not in common, but agree. His least favorite, he refuses to name names, but he does point to some Japanese SUVs, 1 or 2 made by Lexus, where he hints the engineering comes first and a design a definitive second. That's not the Land Rover way of doing things under McGovern's watch. Yeah, I do not like those Lexuses. They are...
Well, I actually have had a hard time liking anything Japanese in a long time because the styling, the design is just boring, and it's the same stuff, and it's what the Japanese think the Americans like, and I think they miss the mark half the time, but because the products are so damn reliable, people buy them anyway.
especially those Lexuses. They just don't like them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I refer to most everything Japanese as a road-going appliance because it's a commodity that gets you from one place to the next, but the experience is just so freaking boring.
Although I would not call their cars, most of the cars, at least come to the U.S., as boring. I just think they are poorly styled.
Well, they're boring to me.
Yeah, I can understand that. I don't think they're boring.
And life is too short to drive boring cars.
I agree there. All right, let's move on to current models and some news on them. The 2019 Range Rover Evoque looks like a baby Velar inside. So this was Car Scoops. Our spy photographer managed to get a first look at the interior too. And
that's amusing because the Velar was originally a bigger Evoque, and now the Evoque is a baby Velar.
And the conclusion is we're dealing with a smaller Range Rover Velar inside and out. The influence from the larger sibling is clear on the outside. The Evoque sports a similar front fascia with sleek horizontal headlights that have Velar written all over them. Seen from the inside, the second-generation Evoque retains the current model's profile with a sloping roofline and higher shoulders. However, the pop-out door handles, another Velar-inspired feature, make the SUV look more upscale than before. The photos might not make that very clear, but the 2019 Evoque is slightly larger than the current model, which means interior space should increase. Speaking of the cabin, the spy photos reveal a very similar dashboard to the Velar. It features 3 big displays, one for the instrument panel, one for the infotainment system, and another one for climate control and seats. The steering wheel looks almost identical to the one from the Velar also. The second generation Evoque will use a revised version of the current D8 platform shared with the next Discovery Sport. Besides the increase in space, the architecture is said to bring improved ride quality and comfort. Expect the new Range Rover Evoque to arrive early next year. So I guess it's a baby Velar now. Is that what that is?
Yeah, it sounds that way.
Car Scoops also talks about the 2020 Tata Harrier. It has been some information has come out about it, and we mention it because it has the underpinnings, shares the platform, anyways, of the Disco Sport and the Jag E-Pace. So
we still need to know though: does it come with vertical takeoff and landing capabilities?
Tata will launch a new SUV next year called the Harrier. It was previewed 5X concept, shares a platform, as I mentioned, with the Disco Sport and the E-Pace. The LRMS/D8 architecture will also be the foundation stone for the next-gen Range Rover Evoque. And as demonstrated on film below, it makes all vehicles quite capable on arduous terrains, regardless of their badge.
Badges? We don't need no stinking badges.
Tata will launch the Harrier early next year, and here's a little bit of details they think. At the moment, details are scarce, but it's believed to be powered by a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder diesel engine. The unit is probably based upon Jaguar's Ingenium family and will come with 2 outputs with both manual and automatic transmission. So that's good to hear that they still have some manuals in the fleet.
Probably only in the Indian home market, though, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. No word on if that will come to the U.S. or anywhere out of India.
Well, if they could build them cheaper, then that would open the possibility of an entry-level Land Rover, basically.
Right. Out of Australia, a long-term test of the Range Rover Velar is a 2018, and I will read some parts of this. This guy is in love with this thing. Proclaimed in March this year as the New York Motor Show as the most beautiful car on Earth, the Range Rover Velar takes SUV design principles, presses the reset button, and refines everything to the utmost degree. I reckon it makes just about every other SUV look clumsy and contrived. Of course, none of this is any guarantee that the Range Rover Velar will deliver fully on its aesthetic promise. There have been plenty of examples of that in the past where wonderfully contrived styling actually hides something less attractive. After spending a long-anticipated week in the latest Range Rover family in our dynamic HSE guise, I can't say that I'm in any way disappointed. This thing has been thoroughly tuned from the finest detail to bring not just its beauty, but its functionality up to the most harmonic pitch. The pop-out door handles fall just short of being indulgently tricky by adding to the Velar's smooth, minimalist shapes, and the applied graphic features such as dummy vents at the sides near the base of the A-pillars and the twin bonnet epaulettes featured on our dynamic versions are more like fine jewelry than decorative excesses.
So he's pleased by fake vents.
And the door handles. And the door handles.
Yeah, I know, but I just, the whole thing about, dummy vents, it's just they're fake. Why put them on there?
I know. Well, Buick.
If you're going to put them on there, make them real. Make them work. Make them do something.
Yeah, Buick did that years ago, too.
Earn their, well, that's because that's a throwback to when those holes actually did something.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But however, he does have problems, and we've heard this, too, from Harold and I actually heard this from a customer actually had a Velar. We've come to an interesting point here. If I had any beefs with Range Rover Velar, this is where this comes home to roost. I question the functionality of a driver-vehicle interface that relies heavily on touchscreens and other touch-sensitive surfaces. In the interest of complicating what was once a simple, easy action, such as adjusting the heating, cooling, or even tuning the radio, it has all devolved into an attention-diverting business where you must first unravel the steps required to perform the simple act you had planned, then attempt to guide your hand to the finite spot on the screen where it was supposed to land. Doing that, even in a vehicle as divinely smooth riding as an air-suspended Velar, is non-ergonomic, distracting, and potentially dangerous.
And wait till you have to do it on a trail somewhere.
And it's not just the functionality. Particularly when the touch surfaces are glossy black, there's also the patina of ugly, disfiguring fingerprints that quickly builds up and would be a godsend to any forensics investigation. The Range Rover Velar, unfortunately, is let down.
So do not commit a crime in a Velar. That's the take-home.
The Range Rover Velar, unfortunately, is let down significantly here. Even when the finger hits the correct point on the instrument panel, there's often a delay before any result is produced. I regularly find myself failing to activate the sat-nav as I repeatedly stabbed unsuccessfully at the display screen, and the distance-setting steering wheel controls for adaptive cruise required not just one, but 2 touches before the desired result was achieved. Why? He said that. Which we've heard before. I mean, we've seen other articles about the infotainment system being slow, responsive, and lackluster. And I wondered that when I've seen the pictures. I've not been in one, but you do wonder about if everything's a touch-sensitive screen and you're driving down the road at 60, 70, 80, 40 miles an hour, you take your eyes off the road to find how to just turn on the defroster, for example.
Or just reach down and tweak the temperature up and down where you should be able just to grab a knob blindly and give it a little twist. But now you got to perform integral calculus on this touch screen.
Back to the positives. The Velar's V6 diesel option, the 212 kilowatt kW, 2,000 nanometer twin turbo 3-liter is nice.
That'd be Newton meters, by the way.
There we go. Newton meter is nicely at home in the Velar, which, despite its aluminum-intensive construction, sits at a heavyish for class tar weight of just below 2 tons and provides a satisfying surge of smooth power. The 8-speed ZF Auto is effective here too, although with all that torque produced at a low 1,500 RPM, the surfeit of ratios hardly seems necessary. I found the diesel V6 to be commendably unobtrusive when up and running. Only when fired up from a cold in a confined space could you hear the throbbing, typical diesel clatter. And finally, I think this is the final part of this, and the Velar's ride, suspended is on air springs with adaptive shock absorbers, is outstanding for the way it soaks up the bumps. Oh, there's just one more thing I pulled out here. Not flawless, so back to some of the negatives here. 2 downsides have shown up during the Velar's extended time on our press test fleet, although fuel consumption in my case didn't come close to the official 6.4 liters per 100 kilometers. He averaged around 8.3 liters per 100 kilometers. It is still better due to the different driving circumstances than managed so far by other people on our team. The 66-liter fuel tank seems small for such a big, powerful vehicle, although the Range Rover Velar's competitors are really no better. Sorry, not really no better, I was going to say. Only the Porsche's Macan 75-liter tank does the job properly. In the end, though, it was Range Rover Velar's outstanding looks that really won me over, and practically everyone else with who spotted on the road over. Maybe I'm stretching things a bit here, but I think it looks good, even looks good dirty. Well, all Land Rovers do look good dirty.
They should.
Yes. Price is tested, Harold. What do you in Australian dollars?
80,000.
3-liter 6-cylinder turbo diesel, 8-speed automatic, $135,000 Australian.
Okay, I don't know my conversion rates very well then.
Yeah, I don't know, but still, that seems quite a lot there. Another article, this time out of The Guardian in the UK, Range Rover Velar, it feels like the brand's flagship model. Just wanted to read one paragraph that was kind of related. The Velar is the most road-biased Range Rover yet. It has a four-wheel drive system, but mostly it's rear-wheel drive vehicle that brings in the front when needed. There's no low-ratio gearbox on the road, which is where most Velars will spend their working lives. It cruises rather than drives. It's hard not to feel cocooned from your cares and woes. The styling is sleek and futuristic. Its super slim matrix laser LED headlights and flush deployable door handles, which ease out to greet you as you approach. Both are hallmarks of Range Rover's reductionist
can't wait till those break.
Philosophy. The clutter-free dashboard is fully digital with 2 large touchscreen panels. Like, come on, dude. He had nothing negative to say, really, about that. It was Martin Love was the author of that, saying that there's a Land Rover fan in Pittsburgh area whose last name is Love. I wonder if
and our local Velar source's first name was Martin as well.
Ooh, so we have a Martin and a Love, but not the same guy.
Okay. Right.
Some older Land Rover news. One-off Land Rover Defender to be built within Selfridges. A one-off Land Rover made a dramatic entrance at Selfridges in London, entering the famous department store through a first-floor window. The unique Selfridge edition Defender Works V8 will form the centerpiece of the new-look menswear department at the Oxford Street store, but not before technicians from Land Rover Classic reassembled the vehicle in full view of shoppers. The Selfridge Edition vehicle began life as a 2016 Defender 110 pickup, but the Land Rover Classics team turned it into a 110 soft top, complete with branded hood in trademark Selfridge's yellow. The bodywork is finished in contrasting bronze green and a heritage-style folding windscreen, and half-height doors complete the open-air look.
That's the great thing about vehicles that bolt together. You can unbolt them and take them into small spaces.
And they had to put that folding windscreen has got to be special, because didn't they engineer that out in I think the early thousands or the early 2000s?
Yeah, but that's just a matter of taking the brackets off, the fixed brackets off, and putting hinges on it. It's the windscreen frame is the same.
Okay.
It's pretty simple. In fact, we went the other direction when we built your truck. We took off the hinges that were useless on a hardtop and replaced them with the fixed brackets.
They have pictures, but not of the full complete version, so I guess that's not until they...
Just reminds me of the fraternity pranks back in the 60s and 70s when they'd take a car apart and reconstruct it in the dean's office.
Right. Exactly. So hopefully we'll see some photos soon of it. I'm kind of curious to see it in its intended use form.
Sounds a bit like the customs that Orvis has built every year.
Yeah.
For their catalog.
So would that make that the ultimate Rovers North sighting?
There you go.
It's an expensive sighting, though, wouldn't it? Yeah. Although, wait a minute, it's in the UK.
Do you need more teacups?
I think, was it Rule 1? It's in the UK, so therefore, it's in the UK, so therefore it doesn't count. You have to have
okay, there you go. It's too easy. It's fish in a barrel to find a Land Rover in the UK.
Right. The oldest surviving Land Rover in the Philippines. And this is a Top Gear Philippines article that came from 2010, but it popped back up. And since we weren't around in 2010, I thought, well, why don't we talk about it? This is a 1958 model Land Rover Series 2 88-inch soft top. It was purchased in 1999 from a fellow enthusiast and restored to its present condition because of the simplicity of the model and the fact that no mechanical or trim parts were missing. The restoration only took about a year. Chassis and engine numbers match, and no modification have been made to it, thus verifying this is indeed the oldest Land Rover vehicle in the country, the Philippines. Based on the numbers, this unit was built and released sometime in April of 1958. Its Land Rover nameplates read Birmingham, England, unlike the nameplates of newer Land Rovers that read Solihull, Warwickshire, England.
Yeah, that's a semantical thing anyway, but yeah, because Solihull is basically a suburb of Birmingham.
Right. In 1976, a British oil exploration company shipped this car to the Philippines. In the early 90s, the company closed and sold the Series 2 to an employee who used it until 1997. Then, due to problems with the brakes, the owner abandoned it in his yard. Matthew, who's a current owner, got wind of its existence and promptly came to its rescue. Kind of cool.
That would be a very early Series 2 because they were still making Series 1s in 58.
Do you know what month the transition happened? Because this looks like...
No, I don't. But that was, because that was early in 58. So, I mean, it would have been early in the first year. So it's an early truck no matter what.
Yeah, it might have been. Maybe it was one of the first Series 2s. Auto Classic had a nice article about a freshly restored Land Rover Defender 6x6 fire engine. It's really cool. It's the 8-minute video is really cool. They did a nice job on it. So you want to
Well, anything 6x6 is cool by definition.
yeah. So
Because if 4 is good, 6 is better.
That's basically what he said. Yeah, no need for us to talk about it because you just should go watch the video yourself. It's just kind of neat to see. They did restore it. It's still, and apparently this was a fire tender that was at Land Rover's factory and it spent all its life there. And then this gentleman got a hold of it and has made it roadworthy and restored it. Toylander has created a 1948 Series 1 Land Rover. This is it's a toy, so it's not a proper.
In other words, it's a scaled replica.
Yes, it is a iconic styling and a kid-focused build. The Toylander delivers incredible attention to detail as it recreates the iconic rugged vehicles. From the seafoam green coloring to a beautifully recreated front grille, you'll be able to choose a custom number plate with your purchase as well. Dual electric motors power this four-wheeler that's capable of pushing up to 5 miles per hour.
But it's about as fast as the original.
That's right. When driving,
they don't go fast.
When driving in the Toylander's latest recreation, it's clear they put emphasis on the interior. A full dashboard and exact replica of the original steering wheel are highlights, but the folding windscreen and working old-school foot brake system really take it over the top. That's not to say the Toylander ignored the body. Cream-colored hubcaps that are wrapped with real air-filled tires. Toylander offers the 1948 Series 1 Land Rover in 2 configurations. You can elect to have it shipped to your door completely ready to roll. Alternatively, there are a variety of do-it-yourself kits that may be more intriguing to the weekend warrior. The second option...
CKD.
The option... That'd be CKD Junior, maybe?
I don't know. It's a CKD, definitely, but yeah, it's...
And the second option allows builders to tackle a custom paint job. The fully assembled version ships for... Want to take a guess, Harold?
No.
In pounds, 4,150 pounds, which currently works out to about $5,400 American. DIY kits
plus shipping, of course.
DIY kits start around half that price, but various add-ons to get to the fully assembled version hardly save much money.
Well, I would have to get it as a kit because I would be ripping those electric motors out and putting a diesel in it. So you should buy one of these Toylanders if your kids have important things to do.
Moving to some events, on November 3rd in California will be a Land Rover Love-In. To help celebrate Land Rover's 70th anniversary, an inaugural Trans Terrace Land Rover Love-In is being planned for the first Saturday in November at the famed and historic Paramount Ranch near Calabasas, California. Quote, it will be an informal, organic event of what I'm calling a Land Rover Love-In, event organizer said in an email. Trans Terrace comes from Latin for across lands. According to the event website, Land Rovers and other 4x4s will gather from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. at the Old West movie set at Paramount Ranch. The event is free for anyone who owns or admires Land Rovers and classic Overlanders. Though focused on vintage Land Rovers, the website notes that other classic off-roaders, including Unimogs, Alfa Romeo Mata, the Volvo Laplander, are all welcome, although all displayed vehicles need to be registered in advance. Registration information is available on the Trans Terrace website under the Entries tab. Looks like a kind of a cool thing. Give us insight if you're going to go to the show, although hopefully this should come out right before the event. I'm sure you could still register.
Yeah, it's only a week away, so...
And now some event reports. The Solihull Society's National Rally took place September 17th through the 21st, 2018 in Moab, Utah. This is one of the oldest Land Rover events in the United States. The National Rally has been held annually since 1989, and they typically rotate between Moab, Utah, and various locations in Colorado. Apparently there was a good, sizable group came out from Virginia this year. And you can see a couple pictures. Atlantic British has in their roverparts.com has some pictures if you want to check that out. And if I'm sure we've had some listeners go, feel free. We'll get you on the show, talk about the event. It's kind of cool.
That'd be a cool-ass convoy to put together a whole bunch of trucks in Virginia and run them all the way out there.
And the Mid-Atlantic Rally took place October 4th through the 7th in Pembroke, Virginia. And that, of course, is the Rover Owners of Virginia had that. And I got to attend. I took the Defender. And local Land Rover enthusiast Scottish Bob came down also. We had got to go off-road on the trails in his Discovery. And had a really good time. It's a nice event. It's really nice. And it was hot. It was so hot that at night
How hot was it?
I didn't need a cover at night. That it was like 70 degrees Fahrenheit at night. It was like, and then a week later I had to turn the furnace on. That's how the temperatures went. But it's a nice event, nice location. That I helped out Jeff Aronson. He was there with Rovers North, and they put on the technical challenge. And Bob and I participated in that. We were, I guess, judges or whatever you call them. The blindfolded challenge. You have a driver, and they have a little course set up. And then you have the driver's blindfolded. They have a radio, and then there's a guide in the car. I got to do it once. Sat in the car, you hold the radio, and that way if make sure they don't run into anybody. And then outside they have a compatriot outside the vehicle who tells them when to turn, how fast to go.
Well, and that is good at honing your skill at listening to only one spotter. Because when you're out on the trail, you get people yelling you directions from 6 different directions, and you pick one and go with it. When you're actually physically blind, that becomes even more important.
Then they had the dinner at night, and that was a good time. Food was good, nice time. I got to talk about the podcast for a few minutes. I set up the truck and had the outrageously large awning deployed, and got to talk to some folks and sell a couple T-shirts, and got a couple ideas for guests for the show. One of the gentlemen in the U.S. who helps out with Land Rover Experience, we might be able to get him on to talk about off-roading, because he also was involved in I think it's a Range Rover Classic rebuild that took place recently, I think in the West. So that was my recollection. Now, looking at the photos here, I think actually Bob made one of Atlantic British's photos. They have like 3 or 4 photos, and there's Bob's truck. So there's Bob's Disco.
And Bob's Disco is named Nessie.
Nessie, thank you.
For the Loch Ness Monster,
right?
Which lives down the street from where Bob grew up.
So that's the news for October 2018. And now on the Centresteer podcast, joining us from eastern Pennsylvania, I believe, is Erik Torno of Lucky 8. Welcome to the show, Erik.
How are you?
I'm well. Thanks very much. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on the show.
You too. Thank you for having me.
So you are here to talk about Rovers on the Rocks X.
Yes, sir. X for number 10, our big 10th anniversary.
Is this like an Apple thing? Am I supposed to say 10, not X, or X, not 10? They have the iPhone. You're supposed to say...
Yeah, we skipped right over 9. We went to 10, and we're going to charge double for this year's event.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So next year, of course, it goes to 11, right?
Yeah, next year we'll probably just call it X Plus or something like that.
X Max.
Yeah, X Plus. We're just going to go down the keyboard, all the signs and everything. We'll just keep using those instead from here on out.
Well, that makes it easier. You just have to print signs. They're good for a couple years. You don't have to reprint them. The advertising's the same.
Yeah. I figure we leak enough oil and gasoline into the environment, so why dirty up some more paper?
Exactly. So Rovers on the Rocks, how did it get its name? Where is it located?
So Rovers on the Rocks traditionally started because it was the only Land Rover rock challenge in America, possibly the world. We're not 100% sure on that, but it definitely was in America. And we had it at Roush Creek Off-Road Park for the first 8 years on the rock challenge course that they had there. So it was basically a time trials event, set it up, you reverse, you lose a point, you hit a cone, you lose a point. So we did that for 8 years. Last year, year number 9, we switched it to Anthracite Off-Road Park over in Shamokin, Pennsylvania. And we had such a great turnout, great event there that we're going to do number 10 there as well this year. So that is the AOAA off-roading site there in Anthracite. They call it Anthracite Off-Road Park in Shamokin, PA. So
that's in north of Harrisburg. Is that right?
It is, yeah. Geographically, it's definitely north of Harrisburg. It's not far off of 81. It's about 30 minutes from where Roush Creek was. I think about northwest of Roush Creek, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's. I think I looked it up, talked to you, of course, before all this. I think it's about a 4-hour drive from the Pittsburgh area. So
okay.
Yes, and we'll be there. I know there's a couple of folks from the local Land Rover Club or the Fort Pitt group are going.
Excellent.
Harold and I are planning to come up. I think we're going to day trip it just for reasons I'm not really sure. We're just going to,
sure.
But we'll come up, drive up in the 110 and check things out and see how meet folks and check it out. I've always wanted to go, and good opportunity to head up there. How many trucks do you typically get, and what kind of activities can you do? So is there still the challenges that you had in the past?
There is, yes. So this year we're going to do the challenge a little bit differently. The challenge section is going to be on Saturday at, I believe, noon or 1 o'clock. We're going to start that. So Saturday, if you're going to come down for the day, Saturday is the day to come. We're going to run it similar. Peter Vollers from Vermont Overland, he's going to come and actually help us set up the course. In years past, like I said, we've done one area specifically that we would go around and do our challenge on. This year, it's going to be set up on several different trails. So you're going to actually have to follow a map, have a navigator, and you're going to need to guide through a certain piece of territory. So it's going to be similar, basically a scaled down version of what the Vermont Overland Trophy is that Peter runs. It's just going to be a couple different sections. So I'll be posted up at one judging, like I said, again, same principles, reverse, forward, you hit the cone, you go off trail. Just make sure you basically do the obstacle as it's laid out without any interferences. And whoever has the most points at the end, we'll calculate them all and they'll get the trophy for the weekend.
So it's highest points, not lowest?
I'm not a scientist. I don't know. I'll let you know when you're there. Great question, though. I'm unprepared for that one. I've never judged one of these, so I'm going to learn with you guys.
We got you. We got you.
Yeah. But, like I said, Saturday is going to be the day for that. And then after we do that, we rally back. Camping is on site at Anthracite. They actually have a campground attached to the place. It's run by Trailhead Campground. We have reduced rate for camping for the weekend. I believe it's $7 a day for a great campsite. They have bathrooms and facilities right on site there. We're going to have a big group tent back in the corner, and we're going to have a catered meal on Saturday night. It's $20 a ticket, but fantastic from Buddy's Log Cabin. Every year we've always had it from Buddy's, so great food there, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, corn, all the good stuff.
Sounds like your typical Land Rover event food from
pretty much. Yeah, it's chicken or barbecue. So
that's right.
After the dinner, then we'll have our raffle. We always have an auction raffle. This year we have a couple $1,000s worth of prizes that have been generously donated. Vendors: Tom Woods, Brit Parts, Ashcroft, Voyager, Goldwing Rovers up in New York. They've all come through really big with some awesome donations. And this year we're going to do things a little bit differently. In the past, we've always, if you ran the event, we gave you a ticket, an entrance ticket for the raffle. We've never sold anything off. This year, we are going to be selling raffle tickets to anyone that wants them, and 100% of the proceeds are going to go to Dave Carroll's family.
Oh, that's very nice of you. So you okay? Mm-hmm. And how much are tickets?
I believe we're going to do 10 for $10, so basically $1 ticket.
Cool. And that
buy as many or as little as you want just to get you in.
Excellent. And then it'll go to Heidi and the kids. For folks who are maybe not familiar with the podcast, our friend Dave Carroll passed away earlier this year, and he's a friend of mine. I've been on the show. Unfortunately, passed away. So this is very nice of you guys to help out Heidi and the kids. Believe Heidi's coming, by the way. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, she posted up that she was going to. So we hope to see them there and just pass that along to them. And Dave also famously the 2015 event winner for the 33-inch and under tire class.
Right.
That's so his little claim to fame with that as well. And the event holds dear to our heart and his as well. It's sad without him, but we do the best we can and hopefully take care of Heidi and the family for him.
Wonderful. Well, I think Dave have his own claim to fame just being Dave.
Right. If you knew Dave, then that was his claim to fame alone. He was one of those one in a million kind of guys.
Absolutely. Many good times on the trail with Dave. Always a good story out of that. If I can go back to the event itself, the technical challenge, is there one overall, or do you have it broken into different categories of trucks?
Yeah, it's going to be it's one overall. We're also it's still going to be the different categories like we've done before. There's the up to 33-inch tire class, which is the Overland class, I believe we call it. Then anything higher than a 33-inch is the Expedition class. But it's going to be it's always the same course for both trucks. We just score them differently, give a fair advantage, because a guy with 32s isn't going to be able to compete with a guy with 37. So they will have their own separate class, but using the same courses.
And the event begins on Thursday or Friday?
Friday. So Friday, November 9th, and then Saturday, November 10th.
Gotcha. And you need to be off site, I assume, by like noon on Sunday?
You can stay all week if you want to. We're just going to go home. As long as I think Anthracite is open and the trailhead campground there, you can stay as long as you want. But the event is just the Friday and Saturday. The admission, we don't charge anything for the event. We're just going. You'll pay for your campground, a trailhead campground, and then your admission to the park to Anthracite direct. Anything that you want from us, like I said, we're going to be doing the raffle and also the catered meal if you wanted that. The tickets are available on our website for $20.
I take it in the evenings there's the typical campfires and folks wander about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice there. It's a great campground. It's pretty much a big loop, so it's not hard to walk from one side to another. We will also, next to our tent, we'll have a big bonfire like we had last year. Bring a cooler of your favorite whatever you like to have, and just hang out. And actually, looking at the weather forecast, it looks about 40 degrees warmer this year than it was last year. So it's already looking good.
Although I will say, a week and a half is a long way away off in weather terms.
That's true. Yes,
Especially
it could change, and I anticipate it too. But I remember, I think it was 2015 or possibly 2014. It was about 10 degrees and snowing heavily, so that was a mediocre year for us.
That became the main winter romp then.
Yes. Oh, yeah, exactly. I think the winter romp was actually warmer that following year, believe it or not. So you never know with that.
Is there also general trail rides?
If you come with some of your friends, you just, like I said, you'll go pay your Friday trail ride and then Saturday trail rides to Anthracite, and they'll give you the trail map, and you are free to go on their entire trail system, have fun. No guided rides. Go with your friends, get in a group, hang out, and just have a great time. Free reign of the park.
And Lucky 8 has been sponsoring and developed this in the whole 10 years?
Yes, sir. The idea of the event was our original conception and been the sole provider of it. Kind of came up with the idea of the event and decided sometimes November it was nice and we wanted something to do, so we started throwing the event.
Yeah, I think sponsor is probably maybe the right host and sponsor, maybe. So because I know because Lucky 8, I mean, you guys travel all over the country. I've seen you in Texas. You've been to Mar in Virginia. So you do get out to help out the community, and then you're also now have started your own event. So I think that's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's always fun to go to the different events and meet the people that we talk to on the phone, selling the parts too, and it gives us a chance to get out and. Right. It's a quote-unquote work trip for us, but we also get to play with our own trucks because we are, as a company, Land Rover enthusiasts. We all own them, drive them, play with them, break them, fix them. When you call here, you're talking to someone who also drove a Rover that day and is going through the same headaches you are. So as a company, we've been in business since 2006. We started off as just an expedition off-road outfitter, providing bumpers, lift kits, things that were hard to obtain stateside here. And in the last 6 years or so, we really ramped up and started providing the basic repair parts, radiators, water pumps, head gasket kits, you name it. Pretty much anything that you could potentially need for your Land Rover, we either have in stock or can get from one of our 45 or 50 vendors that we deal with on a daily basis. And we bring in orders from England about 4 times a week. We stock about 13,000 parts here. So it's one of those, if you need something, if I don't have it, I can get it within a couple of days. So we try and be your one-stop shop for everything.
Is that for all makes, or do you focus on specific, or models, or do you focus on specific models?
No, we have branched into everything at this point. We sort of prided ourselves with the Discovery 1, Discovery 2, and now we're up building D5s here. We have the Lucky 8 D5 on our blog and our website that we've come along with. But I now personally do all the Defender builds here, sort of become the series specialist. So we have ventured into everything. The only thing I don't want to talk to anybody about is a Freelander.
Hey. I was going to say nice things about your D5 too, and then you had to pull that card out.
I'm sorry. I have timing belt kits, but I don't have motors. I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. I don't have a Freelander anymore either, so that's yes.
That's just one of those unicorns,
Yeah. I mean, it did well for the company when it needed it, and unfortunately, it was not as good as it should have been. So
no. I was actually just in a lunch earlier today with a gentleman from the UK, and he was talking about how he had a Freelander 1, but it was the BMW diesel model, I think he said they had. And he said how awesome that car was. If only they had offered that here, I think people would have had a totally different view of the Freelander.
It probably would have had less problems with the rear main seal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you guys focus on basically all models, and I did see at Mar you did have that D5. It was really nice. I wish I'd gotten a chance to take a ride in it on the trail. How does it do?
It's fantastic. Honestly, it's one of those every day it's growing on us a little bit. When they first came out with the original design, I'm sure like everyone else, we were just kind of taken back by it and didn't think it was going to be that great. But with a little bit of modifications we've done, the larger tires, we have our own Proud Rhino brand lift rods that we're doing for it, hidden winch tray, the roof rack, all that. It's really come into its own, and it is, just as capable as any of the other trucks out there at this point, especially with the advent of what they've done with the computer systems in these. They almost drive themselves. It's I still like to feel a little bit of what the truck's doing, but it's also nice to know that it's quite capable out of the box.
So you guys are in Eastern PA?
No, we are actually just outside of Buffalo, New York, in a little town called Clarence.
I just always feel like you're in Eastern PA, so that's probably why I thought you were located there.
Every time you see us, that's where we are, either there, Maine, or Virginia. So,
Okay.
Something wrong with Western New York?
No, nothing's wrong with Western New York. That's where I live.
It just seems like you're always somewhere else when we see you.
Yeah, because there's no events here, so we always have to go somewhere else.
That's true.
And the Buffalo Bills are here. That's what's wrong with this town.
Oh, well, there you go.
I see. Gotcha. Did you grow up in Buffalo? Have you always been there?
I did, yeah, born and raised. Yep.
Okay.
My mother's from the area. My father's originally from Germany, but he moved here when he was about 15, so they've been here ever since.
Sweet. Good.
Yeah. Got to say, though, the Buffalo Bills have some street cred with me. Because I grew up in Minnesota, so I was a Vikings fan. And, of course, the Vikings had the honor of making it to the Super Bowl 4 times and losing. But then the Bills one-upped them by doing it 4 years in a row.
Oh, yeah, but the Vikings look way better than the Bills do these days.
Well, they always do, but that doesn't mean they perform.
Right, that's true. Except for that, we did have the Vikings this year, so I remember that. That was like the only game that we did decent at.
Have you always been in Buffalo? Did the company has always been there?
It has, yes.
Okay. So what do you drive?
Depends on the day. Today I drove my LR3 to work. I got that kitted out with a 3-inch lift, roof rack, Pro Speed roof rack, Compomotive wheels, Turo MT tires, one of our Lucky 8 CFE bumpers on the front. My wife, she has a Range Rover L322 with a 4.4 Jaguar motor, and we also have a Discovery 2 in the driveway, a 2003, and that hard-to-find Monte Carlo blue. And that's the only reason I bought it, because of that color.
Good for you.
Yeah. But I've had plenty of other LR3s, D2s. We had a Defender there at some point, so it all is cyclical. It comes and goes, as you know, with Land Rovers. You find one and you move one.
How did you get into Land Rovers? Did you always bleed green, or something happen?
Oh, something happened. I had one of those 4-letter words before I had a Land Rover.
The Jeep.
It started with a J and ended with an E, yeah. And one day I was actually on my way to pick up my girlfriend, who is now my wife, at work, and I was driving by a used car lot, and they had a 2000 Discovery 2 sitting on the corner, and I looked at it. I always loved that iconic style. This was back in 2004, I think it was, and I just stopped in, talked to the guy, and it was more affordable than I thought, and I left there and that, and I was late picking her up for work, so the look on her face when I showed up in a different vehicle, so. But ever since then, I've owned nothing but Rovers.
It's actually a good story. I like that story. That's a good one. Yeah, you're just driving by and like, yeah, it caught my eye, and yeah.
It really did. It was like one of those car lots where there was the only Land Rover on the lot, and they parked it in the right spot that it caught my attention.
Nice. Well, that's what they do, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And attention, aggravation, all those things.
I like how you say it was more affordable than you thought. Little did you know.
Back then, when the Discovery 2 was only $14,000.
Yeah. But then how much to maintain and repair?
Oh, absolutely. It's crazy. And that truck, I drove all the way up until 2010. I traded it in on an LR3. The company that I actually did, my local Land Rover dealer, they auctioned it off and sold it to a used car lot. And I found that my D2 back for sale on Craigslist about 8 months later. And so I bought it back from the kid that bought it for about $2,000 cheaper than what they gave me on the trade-in. So I bought it back, built it up how I always wanted to have it built, off-roaded it for about 3 years, and it finally the frame rotted out. And I sold the motor out of it, and the motor still lives on somewhere down in Atlanta. So it's still going strong in pieces here and there.
As many Rovers do.
Yes.
Rovers on the Rocks is November 9th through the 11th at Anthracite Off-Road Park. Do you need a pre-reg or just show up?
Just show up. Make sure that you have your campground situated, because last year they did fill up. So if you are coming, give Trailhead Campground a call. We do have a link if you're on Facebook. Just type Rovers on the Rocks X in your search bar. It'll come up, all the information, the links to everything that you need to know.
And your website is Lucky8, the number 8 LLC.com.
Yes, sir. That is correct.
There we go. We'll have a link in the show notes, of course, for that. So if
you.
For anyone can get a link to that. It is Lucky, the number 8 LLC.com. And I know there's information about the event also there. So as a reminder, Lucky 8 is going to have a raffle at on Saturday night, and the proceeds are going to go to Dave Carroll and Heidi and the kids, Dave Carroll's family. So very kind.
Everyone will be generous and provide for them, and they have themselves a great Christmas with it.
Indeed. And I'm sure you'll take donations too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anyone is feeling generous enough to give. Well, if you want to add something to the raffle, please, that'd be more than fantastic and greatly appreciated by everybody. Everyone so far has been more than generous with this, and we thank everyone for their outpouring of support with it.
Well, I want to thank you personally for doing the raffle and helping out Heidi and the kids. It's very much appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for coming on the show and talking about Rovers on the Rocks.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me and letting me blather on and let me plug a little bit. It's been fun. I appreciate that. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys there in the flesh in about a week and a half from now.
And now joining us on the Centresteer podcast, all the way from the west coast of Canada, is Bristol Foster. Welcome, Bristol.
Thank you, John.
We're happy to have you. I have to give a shout out to a friend of mine who lives in Montreal. She just innocently sent me this video from Land Rover Canada about Grizzly torque, and she's like, "Did you know about this?" And I did not. So that's how we know about you, thanks to Tracy, and she lives in, as I said, Montreal. So thank you, Tracy. And we know about Grizzly torque. So
you do seem to be a well-kept secret, though.
There's very little info out there. There was a couple articles, and there was this video. So I guess looks like back in 1957, you and a friend of yours, Robert Bateman, drove around the world in a Pilcher long wheelbase Series 1.
Right.
And so how did that start? Like, where'd that idea come from?
Well, how far do you want me to go back?
Hey, we have as much time as you want, and you can tell us the whole story, because on the podcast we like the nitty-gritty details.
Somewhere between now and the invention of the wheel will be how far you have to go back.
Okay. Well, maybe I should mention first that I've known Bob Bateman a long time. We were bird watchers together in Toronto. And when I was doing my master's degree up at Churchill, Manitoba on Hudson Bay, I needed an assistant, so I hired Bob. He was teaching He was teaching geography and art, and so I hired him for the summer, and then I knew him really well. And then I was finishing off my master's degree, and I wondered, I had over 20 years in school by that stage. And I thought, what am I going to do next? I don't want to go to school again so soon. So I'd seen the Land Rover trip from London to Singapore.
Oh, yes.
The Oxford-Cambridge may ring a bell. You must, yeah. Okay, so I'd seen that, and that was way in the back of my mind. I thought, well, why not drive around the cotton-picking world? That sounds even more of a... Yeah. So...
Well, yeah, because anybody can drive London to Singapore, but, around the world, that's the next level. So.
Especially in the late 50s. Yeah, anybody could do it, right?
That's right. So Bob Bateman and I, well, first of all, I was sitting in a bathtub wondering what to do next, as I was saying, and suddenly it sprang into my mind, yes, I should go around the world in a Land Rover. And I can remember the whole setup of the taps and everything. It was just a brilliant idea that suddenly came to me. So I thought, well, who would I go with? Well, I didn't want to go alone. I didn't have a girlfriend who would stand up to the
right.
Like that. So my best friend I phoned Bob Bateman and say, hey, Bob, would you like to come? And he mulled it over for a couple of days. I think I gave him 3 days to think about it. And then he phoned me back and he said he couldn't see any reason why he wouldn't do it. He was by then teaching high school geography and art. And what better for a geographer and an artist than go around the world by Land Rover? So that was all set. Then we just had to decide what vehicle. And we were talking about a Volkswagen van and even an amphi car. I don't know if you remember them, but they were an amphibious small vehicle.
Yes. They were an awful car and an awful boat, but a great combination of the two.
It's a nice idea that didn't work. Yeah. And we did consider one for maybe a half an hour. And
just getting across BC or really any province in an amphicar would be enough accomplishment.
Well, anyhow, we decided that the only one to get was a Land Rover.
Right.
And then the question is what model. We checked out and saw all the different models of Land Rover, and someone said, hey, we'll try to get a conversion, an ambulance conversion, like my Pilchers. We tried them. Of course, the thing was the price. And the Land Rover normal long wheelbase was around $4,000. And turned out, it's a long story. I'll cut it down, though. I'm sure you're not interested in this, but the Pilchers was $4,000 too. So what's the point of getting the normal Land Rover when we could have one with comfortable beds and the whole cupboards and so on. So that's the one we got.
Was the Pilcher outfitted that way, or did you have to outfit it with the beds and the kitchen?
Yeah, well, I don't know how much the basic Pilchers is actually. Mm-hmm. We told them, and I guess Pilchers company just south of London fitted it out, and well, I guess they asked, "What would you like, beds?" And well, yeah, sure, but you need beds, and it's an ambulance,
right?
We need
right.
Beds.
It would have beds and some cabinetry at least.
Right.
Yeah, and also we said, please put an open hatch above the passenger seat.
That is too cool. That's too cool. That's just like the first Overland trucks. They had that sunroof hatch. That was.
Well, that's great because I did 99% of the driving, and Bob would be standing on the seat, waving to the crowds like Rommel visiting his army.
Right.
So,
that is the commander's hatch, after all.
Yes.
That's right. So it worked really well, and my vehicle. So I wanted to take care of it, not that Bob wouldn't, and he drove it a few times when I wanted to take movies of him. Of the vehicle moving along. Otherwise, I drove it. And so I worked on a freighter to get to England and went to the factory. I was taking a course in maintenance because I was not only the driver, but the maintenance guy too. And that was really interesting. And the Land Rover was very hospitable. And I remember we'd get together for lunch, and it was quite relaxed. We were all the top people in Land Rover were sipping their Bristol cream sherry and stuff like that. It was anyhow that time passed quickly, and at the same time Bob was coming over on his ship, and we met I think in Liverpool, and drove around Britain in the Land Rover down to Land's End in the southwest, up to Scotland, trying out the Land Rover, and it worked marvelously. We really loved it. So that was all set too. And then getting to our route. How do we? Oh, you got a frown on your face.
I'm kind of taken by the fact that you were inspired by the first Overland, and we've had Tim Slesser on the show. He's probably the best guest we've ever had because Tim's cool, and he's and you'll be number 2 now because they did. Cool
and Tim likes America, so that's a thing in his favor too.
Yeah, absolutely, and just and really, first Overland's inspiring to us too. So I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that you were inspired by the first Overland. How did you hear about it? Do you recall? Because that would have happened about a year or two before you set out on your journey.
Exactly. It was a few years before, and how I heard about it, I don't know. I guess it was on TV.
Probably on the CBC because from the BBC, since Attenborough had video from, film from that adventure. So
that's right.
Yeah. Book wasn't until 59, I think, by the time Tim came out with a book.
Yeah. No, there's no book that I saw.
Yeah.
So,
okay. So
the question is what route we were going to take. And so we got out a school atlas. We sat down and we drove a line from Britain across Europe and down to, I guess, Algiers and down across the Sahara Desert. We wanted to see the tropical rainforest of Africa. So we headed south from Mediterranean to some Ghana, and then east right across to Kenya, Tanganyika in those days.
Yeah.
And then we put a line across the Indian Ocean and went around India. And then we set a line up to Nepal, and then over to Burma, and into Thailand, and down through Thailand to Malaya, as it was called then, to Singapore, then a line across to Australia, and across Australia. That's what we drew on the map. What we actually did was slightly different, because in 1957, there was war going on in North Africa. Egypt was having a brawl, and so was Algiers, and it was strongly suggested we ship around to West Africa, which we did. We put the Land Rover on a freighter and went around to Ghana, West Africa, which was interesting. But we don't get into
that sounds like a story.
But we basically followed that line that was drawn on a school atlas.
Did you come through? So then you came back to the west coast of Canada, I assume, after Australia?
Yes. Well, yeah. We ended up in Australia, both of us, and I stayed on later because Bob had to get back to teach school. So I stayed on a couple more months at the university in Sydney, and eventually got the Land Rover shipped back to Vancouver. And then by then it was November and cold, was really cold, and there wasn't any, heat in the Land Rover.
Still not. Still not.
What?
Joke. But the Land Rover people in Vancouver, they put in a gasoline burning heater, which really put out the heat. And so we drove east. My mother actually flew out and joined me because she didn't want me to drive alone all the way back there, nor did I. So that was fine. She loved the trip. And we ended up back in back in Toronto. So that's the around the world with the Land Rover.
So your mother drove with you from Vancouver to Toronto?
Yes.
That's pretty cool. That's
Through the Canadian Rockies, I'm guessing?
Yes, that's right.
That's beautiful country up there.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it was so cold that the Land Rover, I don't know how much detail you want, but
a lot of it. Lots of detail. We love detail. We're Land Rover enthusiasts.
Mm-hmm. The Land Rover wouldn't start. So I'd take out the battery at night to keep it warm because it was 30 below zero. And I'd take it into the hotel in a place like Banff. So the battery was up to full charge. And then I put it into the Land Rover and could barely turn it over. Certainly couldn't start it. So we had to call for a tow. We got towed up the road. I heard a strange noise out the window. I thought, what the heck's that? And I stuck my head out the window and I looked, and the tires weren't turning. We were being pulled along like we were one piece of cast iron.
Wow.
The tire, we're being pulled on ice. That's why they weren't turning. So we were just getting nowhere until we hit a bit of sand, and then they started to turn over a bit, and then we finally got it going, and then we kept on driving and driving and driving. And so that was a bit of a challenge, and it worked fine, though. It was fine.
Let's go back then to the beginning of the journey, and then there's got to be some stories along the way that you encountered, because I noticed in the truck that looks like Robert painted on the side, on the painted different scenes. And what are some of your better memories of places the countries you were in, or maybe something surprised you? Is there a country or location maybe that surprised you?
Oh, there are lots of things that surprised us. We're both naturalists, so there are lots of biological surprises and all cultural surprises as well. And I think probably the most spectacular cultural surprise and enjoyment was the pygmies in eastern Zaire and what was then the Belgian Congo. And they piled into the back of the Land Rover. I think we had about 20 people in or on the Land Rover. We had about 15 in the back. I had 3 sitting in the front seats. Some were sitting in the front tire, on the tire at the front, 4 on the front tire. And still there wasn't room for one guy. He sat on the roof. And I don't know. Have you seen the movie?
Well, there's that video. It was actually a question. Is there more because it looks like you took video. Did that get turned into film, I guess? Did you get that turned into a movie? Did you make a movie?
Video in 1957?
Well, video. I meant, sorry, that's the general word. I mean, you took Super 8 movies, I assume.
No, 16 millimeter.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was making a lecture for when I got back home. I'd lecture for the Audubon Society, which is a natural society in North America. Right. So I was filming all the way along the trip.
And so I saw a link is that the Antha films?
Antha?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's like I did a search here.
Your dyslexia is kicking in. I believe that's Anthill.
Oh, it is. It's real small. It's tough to see. Come on, give me. I need to get glasses now. So is that the film related to the Anthill films?
I don't know what Antha is.
No, Anthill. Anthill.
Well, the movie's about an hour and a half long.
Okay.
Different thing. What we're seeing from Anthill is that Land Rover 70 thing.
They must have made, Hill must have made the Grizzly Torque Land Rover.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, how can we find the film? Is it available somewhere?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I don't know how you got started on this whole enterprise, but yeah, they must know. They're the ones that told you to do this interview. They must know where the film is.
Yeah, we'll have to do some digging and tracking down, because I did a lot of of searching, and there isn't much.
We found you through the little series of short videos that Land Rover produced for their 70th anniversary. They did one about you guys.
They made a 4.5-minute film in about 30 seconds, much shorter. And,
that's the one.
Well, you certainly should see more than that.
Well, we'd like to.
Well,
yeah.
Ask the people who sent you that to send you more.
Yeah, we'll have to do that and try to track down your film.
Well, there's more there than you'd want to see, because Bob Bateman and we looked at the movie and we made comments and we were asked questions as we went through the whole thing, and that must have taken more like 2.5 hours.
Right.
Well, that's the kind of thing we like, so that sounds good.
Yes, well, it exists, and if you're desperate, I can send you something.
We just might be that desperate.
A gentleman named Graham Aldis has created a video called After Overland, where he interviewed Tim Slesser and BB and a bunch of and all the gentlemen that were on the first overland voyage, and so we've talked to him. So we like that detail. We like to know about the Land Rovers, what happened to them, what the journey was about, and how it came about. So how did the name Grizzly Torque come about? I assume grizzly bear, or being a naturalist, I guess you're a biologist. Is that where that kind of comes from?
Well, Bob and I have sat down trying to figure out where did it come from, and yeah, we should know, shouldn't we? There was a comic strip back in those days, well before your day, called Pogo.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard of it. Yep.
I remember those.
Well, that's where Grizzly Torque came from. And I've gone through, there's, of course, decades of Pogo. It's all on the internet, and I couldn't see Grizzly Torque anywhere. And I suspect we made it up that, first of all, it's a Land Rover. Land Rover's got lots of torque, and it's a grizzly-looking vehicle compared to a Jaguar. So I guess that's where it came from. We couldn't find it in Pogo, but I know we were closely following Pogo, and we assumed it came from Pogo. You'll have to leave it there.
I think that makes complete sense there. I assume on some of this beer was involved. Would I be correct?
Beer?
Yeah, the Canadian national beverage.
That's right.
Well, that's too far back. Lost in the mist of time.
Understood. Did you have any major breakdowns? I did see in the one video that the truck rolled over. How did that happen? It was at least on its side.
If you go to India today, there's traffic jam even on the highways, apparently. Back in those days, you would almost never see a car on the highways, which were paved and straight and smooth and narrow. But there were trucks, lots of trucks. And we'd see one after another overturned in the ditch. And we thought, what the heck's going on? And then suddenly we were overturned in the ditch ourselves. And we were driving along, and there's a bicycle on the wrong side of the road. And at the last moment, it switched to get on the proper side of the road. And I turned hard to the left to avoid it, ended up in the ditch. The bicycle driver's head hit the sun visor and flattened it down to the glass, and he was thrown in the air, and we ended up, as I say, in the ditch with oil pouring out of the engine, and Bob was typing a letter home, and it was wrapped around my neck, and the window, the driver's window was broken. So we thought, this is the end of the bloody trip. It was in a part of India south of New Delhi, between New Delhi and Bombay, which was famous for thugs. The word thug comes from thuggy, a Hindu word, and so it's quite famous for being robbed on the highway. There we were rather vulnerable on our side in the ditch, and we weren't there long when a bus came along, stopped, and everybody climbed out, looked at the body, and the passenger, there was a bicycle passenger as well. He was okay, but the body looked dead. And they came over and pushed the Land Rover back on its wheels, and I drove up on the road, put more oil in the engine, and and eventually loaded the body in the back of the Durmobile and drove along the highway towards the next hospital. And he was alive. And we put him into the hospital and carried on up the road. So that's how it ended up in the ditch.
Did the vehicle recover then? Any other major damage?
No major damage. And they put in a new window. They had no glass that would fit, so they put in a thick plastic window. And that's a clue to later on in the story.
Now you're teasing us.
Yeah, exactly. Windows popped out, I noticed, in the front windscreen. They kind of pop out. I've never seen that before. Is that unique to the Pilcher, or do you know? Harold,
I don't
maybe?
think so. They're hinged at the top, and so they swung out, which was very helpful on hot days. Get a bit of breeze coming in.
I don't believe that's a standard Land Rover feature.
Did the scuttle vents, were they functional, or maybe they were?
They're functional, yes.
Okay. I was just kind of curious if maybe because you lost the vents, maybe they made the windscreen pop.
No.
And I noticed in the front, and I'll assume this is another inspiration from First Overland. You have gin and tonic on your.
You're right.
Did you counter any other overlanders maybe as you're traveling?
No, there were a few other repairs we had to do. One in the Cameroons of West Africa, which was the worst road of the whole trip, and the steering rods just under the bumper, the front bumper, they got bent. One of them got bent on a rock, and so the tires were towed in a bit. It was a beautiful spot in the rainforest of Cameroons, and I said, well, let's stay there a few days or until we fix this. And so I managed to get it off, and there's a concrete bridge there, a little bridge, and I whacked the steering rod on the concrete bridge, more or less straightened it and put it back in and carried on. And we were driving through a lot of creeks and rivers in India, and we went up to Nepal. And there's a rotten road there, too. Actually, it was the first, it had just been open to vehicle traffic. The Indian Army had finished off this road into Kathmandu, and we were one of the first vehicles to go in. But it was through an awful road, even though they had just been built, and especially rivers. And the water got into the bearings, and so we were driving along in India by then, down by the Ganges, and you could hear noise coming from the bearings, like that. So,
I love it.
So we stopped by the road, and our vehicle was a real curiosity in India, especially India. There was only about this was 1958, and they got independence in 47. So it was only about 10 or so years after they had independence, and they all could speak English pretty well. So they really were curious about us, and they'd take us in for curries and bring us, oh, you need a Coca-Cola? Here is a Coca-Cola. And yeah, and it reminds me of another story. We parked the Land Rover in any nice spot for the night. Well, when you're in India, it's hard to find a nice spot because you're surrounded by people and farms and so on. So one evening, it was getting dark, so we just drove out into a farmer's field, which was very dry and bumpy, and we camped out there for the night, and that was fine. The morning, along comes this fellow, and he says, oh, the police officer, the chief would like to see you. So, oh, okay. So we took him into town, and we went to where the police officer was, and he said, oh, it is so nice to meet you. You're from Canada. Oh, how do you stand? It's so cold there. Oh, he went on and on, but supplied us with a cold Coca-Cola, and it was hot, warm morning. And so we chatted on very amiably, and then he said, oh, last night you're driving through town. Yes, that's right, yeah. You drove over my dog. You drove over my dog. You killed my dog.
Whoops.
And whoops. Yeah. Ooh. So, of course, we were very apologetic. Oh, goodness, how could we do that? And I can remember clearly the town was just packed with people, including children all running around. I'm glad we didn't drive over a child. And, yeah, there was a bit of a bump, but then the road was rather bumpy. That might have been the dog. I don't know. So he was very philosophical. Was my favorite police dog, but anyhow, he had just had puppies, so we're okay. And gave us another cola, and off we went. That's just a minor little bump in the road.
Nice. I like that. So as you traveled, you said you were kind of a curiosity. Was that always the case? Because I suspect that not many folks had seen a motorized vehicle, especially one traveling all over the planet at this point. Overlanding, especially in any vehicle, was kind of new to everybody.
Yeah, that was always a curiosity, especially going along the equator in Africa as well. That's why maybe so many pygmies piled under the back. They were taking us hunting, actually, and they were jumping in with their nets and bows and arrows and so on to drive down the road to a spot they knew where we could go and maybe get an animal in a net. So they were singing in the back of the Land Rover as we drove along, and they have really beautiful music. They don't have any instrument. They were just, how can I say, Bob Bateman actually, when we get to talk together now and then, and we sing the song that they were singing, sort of.
So they were an African a cappella group.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So we give a poor rendition, which I won't bore you with now.
Fair enough.
Anyhow.
Fair enough. Did you get help along the way? Like, did the various Land Rover dealerships help you out, or did you need help from them? I wonder if they knew you were coming, or
they knew we were coming. We had letters to them. We had also an agreement with Dunlop to supply tires if we needed them, from Fina Gasoline, which was a European gasoline company, which was in the Belgian Congo, which was very handy, and Life magazine. You're doing an article for Life magazine and so on. So we had other things, and we did need new tires by the time we got to Malaya, and Dunlop supplied new tires. But Land Rover, it was a well-functioning vehicle, and there weren't that many miles on it, really. By the time we got back to Toronto, it was only about 35,000 miles. And nowadays, you hardly think this car is broken in yet by that amount of miles. So we didn't have any engine trouble, except, and this was really frustrating, because I was trying to figure out what was wrong. The fuel pump wasn't delivering fuel. It was an electric fuel pump. And we'd be ready to go across the Ganges on a barge or something like that, and the fuel pump wasn't operating. And it would just like that. It just wouldn't be pump going, pump, pump, pump. And had the thing apart a few times, trying to figure it out. Finally, I realized there were two gas tanks, one under the driver's seat, one under the passenger seat, and there's a little lever that you lifted up and down to join one tank or the other tank. And that lever had cork in it, which was the seal between tanks, but it dried out in the heat. Air could get past the cork. You look like you understand it all now.
No, we've been there.
We've been there. No, it makes complete sense. Yeah, I like how you're going through all the thinking as to how did that happen. You wouldn't think that cork's going to dry out. So
it wasn't the fuel pump at all.
Yeah.
You just take out that cork and put it in hot water for a while and get it swelling up again, and off we went. So we really had no reason to go to a Land Rover place for repair.
I love these field repairs. It's always ingenious and cool stuff. Of course, modern vehicle, you could never do that. It's not going to happen.
Well, getting back to the bearings were had water in the bearings. So again, the East Indians are very helpful, and they were curious, and they stopped and said, "Oh, can we help you? What is wrong?" And we showed them, and before we knew it, they had the tire off and the seal off, and they had the bearings out, and they were washing the bearings. They had a bit of gasoline, I guess, and put oil on it and stuck it back in. They didn't have a new gasket to go on between the two layers of steel that you bolt on to the side of the. I see you're looking a little puzzled. But
no, I'm thinking because I've heard. I think I have a sense where you're going. We've heard this kind of story before of using leather or something like that, and using that kind of improvising.
The beer boxes.
Yes.
Beer boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, they used a page out of a magazine.
There you go. That'll work too.
They tapped around the edge to get it break in the right way and put in holes and stuck it on, and off we went with a piece of magazine holding everything together.
And it probably got you all the way back to Vancouver, right?
Yes, maybe still. It won't be still there because the whole vehicle's. Well, anyhow, that's another story.
Yeah, we'll get to that. No,
that is coming.
That's coming. We're going to get to that. Australia. Did you get to Ayers Rock, perchance?
We landed at Derby. This is the closest spot in Australia to Singapore, and it was just a little town, and they dropped us off there. And we drove ever east, right across to Queensland and Barrier Reef, but we did go down to Ayers Rock, and the road was it was generally fairly good. It was straight, of course, because it was just a desert. We had no trouble. We camped out, which we loved the camping in Australia. And we got to the East Coast and went out to the Barrier Reef, hitchhiked out with a fisherman. And anyhow, just this anecdotal stuff. You don't want that.
No, it's interesting. I mean, the Great Barrier Reef has got to be something to see. I mean, I'm sure it's amazing, especially probably in the 50s. It was still in good shape, right?
Yes, right. And now, sadly, it isn't. So, we went out there with our tent and camped out on the Barrier Reef. They pick us up in 5 days, and that's where we stayed. And he gave us a gun. He said, "If you see any cats, shoot the cats," because some idiot released cats on the island.
Actual feline, like
domesticated pussy cats.
Yeah.
And they also release chickens. They call them chooks out there. So hungry fishermen could potentially shoot a chicken if the cats hadn't killed them all. So we were squeaking, sounding like a wounded bird, and the cats come running over, and we're shooting cats. We didn't eat any cats, though. We just shot one chicken.
They taste like chicken.
They do, actually. They're not bad. Probably have them a lot in Burmese restaurants.
The roads then, so you said Australia roads were, of course it's fairly much desert and sort it's kind of packed down, but the rest of the journey, roads are just being developed across the world, I'm assuming. So there was probably slow going, correct?
Yeah, really slow going roads in thinking of West Africa again, the Cameroons, where they would have great big wheels on some of these vehicles and great big ruts. And in the movie, we fall into one of the ruts, and we had a winch on the front of the Land Rover. So we had to winch our way out of the rut. But the vehicle was really heavy, had a lot of stuff in it. And so we had to unload the vehicle a bit to get out of that rut. That road, they allow vehicles to travel one way one day, the other way the next day. So you had to either get through in a day or be prepared to wait a day for the vehicles going the other way, which was a place where we decided we wanted to stop anyhow.
A true one-way road, huh?
True one-way road, definitely.
So you need not just a map, but also a calendar to navigate.
Well, we had a book called Trans-African Highways, and it's still available, apparently, because somebody got a hold of it. It was very helpful, because there's no maps for highways in Belgian Congo.
More roads now, we know that, and it's a little easier, but...
Politically, it's a lot worse. Well, in 1963, we drove in a Land Rover from London to Nairobi, where I worked for 5 years teaching wildlife ecology. So I drove up the Nile River with this new Land Rover, which was a dormobile, a diesel dormobile, and it had a top that went up, and the beds and all the seats were flattened out into beds would sleep 4 people and had a sink, and it was more luxurious than the dormobile, actually.
So you had a second Land Rover then? Is that what we're hearing?
That's right.
What year was that? Was it Dormobile? Were we talking like mid-60s?
1963.
Nice. And so that was, and then you drove from London down to Nairobi, you said. You were there for 5 years. Nice. And do any adventuring with that truck, or was it just, did you live in it, or was it more of just an overlanding vehicle?
Oh, no, we lived in it, and we took the students in it on trips that we could all camp out in it, and we went down to Serengeti and all around the usual spots, and lots of getting stuck. Yeah. Because this country, it's black cotton soil, which is hard to cement when it's dry, and it's gooey and sticky and deep and muddy when it's wet. So great place to get stuck. And there isn't always a tree to winch to. So we would bury our spare tire and winch to the spare tire. Your eyes are rolling. You have to bury the spare tire and dig a trench for the rope up to the Land Rover so the tire wouldn't flip out, and then you winched the tire.
That's actually a really good idea. I hadn't considered you do that. They now make an anchor people make that will dig into the ground, and you could use that as a winching point. But yeah, before folks made that, that's a good idea.
Anchor is probably moderately heavy, and the tire you're carrying anyhow.
So on the Grizzly Torque, did you take a lot of spares with you? Did you have a lot of field repairs? It sounds like you had a couple of them, but
we brought an extra outer tube tire, but otherwise we didn't bring many spares. We didn't need many spares. It was so well made that we did not need spares, and it was that part of the world where there still Land Rovers were everywhere almost, and parts were everywhere. Nowadays it's so different, which is too bad.
Yes, now you have to deal with Toyotas and other things.
Yes.
Well, now you have to take a computer with you if you want to keep it maintained.
Yes.
Well, that's true. In those days, the good old days, a half-assed mechanic like myself could generally keep it moving.
Yeah. Well, you need a hammer and a roll of tape. That's pretty much all you need.
Yeah, if it didn't work, just hit it again.
Right.
That's right. I still like the very beginning. You told us about taking the battery into the hotel for the night so it was warm enough.
And if you're camping out, you put it inside your sleeping bag.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the inside had two beds, and I guess they folded down, and then you had storage underneath of that. Did you take any? And you had some cabinets. I assume you had standard stuff. And you had your film equipment, and you guys were also doing some biological research, I suppose, as you're also going. Did you take any special scientific equipment with you?
We were collecting specimens for the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. So that meant quite often we'd set out mouse traps and rat traps and catch creatures, and then the next day skin and stuff them. We would tell the pygmies, bring us small animals, and before we knew it, they'd go out with their little bows and arrows, little kids, and they'd be bringing in these mice and rats and bats, and before we knew it, we were overwhelmed. We couldn't skin them fast enough. So we had lots of specimens that we had for the museum in Toronto, which we had recently we had a gathering in Victoria, Bateman and myself, and they brought in all these specimens that we hadn't seen for 60 years, and we did a lecture to the assembled multitude.
So it sounds like you could have been teaching taxidermy along the way too, then.
Yes.
And did you keep them all with you, or did you send them back periodically? I assume you kind of had them shipped.
We were doing what was called museum specimens, and we made them flat skins, so they took very little space. A flat mouse, it looks like a Mack truck went over it. So we didn't ship any back.
You took them all with you then?
Yes. Yep. The movie film, which was a 16-millimeter, 100-foot rolls, would run 2.5 minutes. So shipped lots of them back, and never did one get lost. Never did it take more than 10 days to get from the backwoods of Belgian Congo to Toronto. It's amazing. It would take that long to get from here to the next town nowadays.
I know.
So lots of movie films sent back.
So on one of the pictures I saw, there's looks to be a falcon or some bird in the driver's seat. Is there an interesting story around that?
Oh, well, when we asked for specimens from the locals, especially the pygmies, they'd bring us anything, including deadly snakes, and we didn't want them particularly. And they brought a young, it might have been a falcon. It never grew up. It died. But yes, you look so sad.
I know. Well, yeah, poor bird, right? It was so. I thought maybe when you were talking taxidermy, I was wondering maybe if it had been stuffed. I guess it was alive, huh?
It was alive. That's right. So we had lots of things to feed it, all these innards of mice and bats and so on.
So you made a new friend.
Yeah.
That was your entrail disposal system.
It was not only entrails, the whole mouse carcass except the skull. You have to save the skull as a part of the specimen.
Wow. There you go.
So did the Falcon, was it your traveling companion for a while?
Yeah.
Did it have a name?
Oh, boy. That's lost in the mist of time. It didn't live that long.
Oh, okay. So you traveled through, was it 4 continents, at least a dozen countries, 30,000 miles, and it took you, what, about 14 months? Is that right?
Yeah, I stayed on in Australia for another few months.
Okay.
But the actual trip was about 14 months.
The truck gets shipped back to Western Canada, I guess around Vancouver. Did you keep the truck, or what happened to it?
I drove it to Toronto and saw the family and all that.
That's
and then
right.
I started a PhD in Vancouver. So I drove it back to Vancouver, and the PhD was a study of the evolution of the native mammals of Queen Charlotte Islands. And the Queen Charlotte Islands are now called Haida Gwaii. Anyhow, they lie immediately south of the Alaska archipelago, just down in there in Canada. So
Okay.
the Grizzly Torque went up there and for 2 summers, driving around Haida Gwaii for 2 summers, and had the comfortable beds. And the professor came up and slept in one of the beds and quite enjoyed it too. And that worked fine. And finally, at the end of that, as I say, I was buying another Land Rover, going back to driving up the Nile to East Africa. So I sold it to a friend who was studying peccaries, which is a kind of pig, and he was driving down to Texas with the Land Rover. And it would have been a challenge because the Land Rover, about top speed downhill, was, I think, 55.
Ooh, that much?
Yeah.
Well, downhill. Anyhow, he finally sold it when he finished his research, and then it disappeared. It was sold to various people and lost track of it until one day the phone rings, and it's this guy, Stuart Longhair, calling me. And he said, I'm trying to trace down your Land Rover. And I said, well, good luck. Have you found it yet? And he said, well, maybe. And he explained how he's a Land Rover nut. And he owned about 3 or 4 restored.
Mm-hmm. We've met a couple of those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beautifully restored. And he heard about up near a town called Williams Lake in the interior of British Columbia, where a fellow had 3 Land Rovers, old ones, that he wanted to sell. And so he went up and had a look. And he said, that one looks different. Doesn't look like the other 2. Didn't look like any Land Rover he had seen before. And he said, I'll give you $3,000 for that. And the owner said, oh, no, you won't. You have to give me $2,000, but you have to take them all. You have to take all 3.
Oh, gee, tough deal there.
I wanted to get rid of them. So he took away 3 Land Rovers, I guess 2 of them for scraps, and one of them, he wondered about that one. And he's tracing down through the Rover, these Land Rover clubs all across North America. And he's trying to trace down who could have driven it. And he heard that some bird watchers had driven it. Well, that was a pretty good clue. Anyhow, he somehow got my name. He asked you to talk to Stuart, I'm sure. He's an interesting guy. He asked me, well, how can I tell that it's your vehicle for sure? And I said, well, look on the driver's window. Is it plastic or glass? It was plastic, and therefore it was the original Grizzly Torque.
Because you had rolled it over in India.
Yes. Spent a heap of money, like a big heap of money.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's no other kind.
Well, yeah. 200. Well, I won't say what it was. Maybe that's classified. $225,000, and restored it really beautifully. It is just like the original, as much as possible. He would get the headlights from Kuala Lumpur and the brake lights and the fuel pump from Brisbane, from all around the world. He got these parts, and I was at his restoring place where it was being restored. And there was a package that just arrived from Britain. Solihull is where the Land Rovers are made, near Birmingham. And this package was all wrapped in oilcloth. And so we opened it up, and it was dated 1955. So it's been sitting in the factory since 1955. And now this is almost a few years ago. Unwrapped it, and it was wrapped and wrapped and wrapped. And then he came to a layer of grease, all covered with grease. And you put that in gasoline, shake it around a bit, and it would be like a brand new piece. And that's how some of the pieces that went into the old Grizzly Torque, they're brand new.
New old stock.
Yes, old stock indeed.
Mm-hmm. You probably did it at the right time, too, as Land Rover was winding down the original production line for the Series Defender truck, too. So they were probably happy to move some product out.
The thing that was missing on it was that Bob Bateman had painted these paintings, one for each country, all the way around the outside. There's a panel there that was maybe 5 inches, 6 inches high, that was a strip around the country, around the Land Rover, the way they happened to press the metal. There's this raised portion. And though Stuart wanted Bob to paint them back on, well, Bob is such a famous artist now, and he gets so much money for his paintings that he couldn't afford the time. He's got endless commitments for painting, and he just couldn't have done it. So what we did was we took pictures as our trip unfolded, and so that there were pictures of these paintings, including my movie, and they were taken off the movies, taken off the still pictures, and enlarged and sharpened and so on, and they're put as transfers. So paintings were actually transferred back onto the Land Rover.
They look like someone repainted them. They look nice job. It looks really good.
Yeah, it does. It's good. Look really closely, you can see their transfers.
So no, actually, I think you'd be more likely to call them limited edition Bob Bateman prints.
Okay. Yes.
And
they're worth more that way.
And you were reunited with the truck at one point. I think you and Bob. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was reunited a few days ago because we had this film crew, the ones that made those ads you're looking at. They were at the Bateman's house for almost 3 days, and there were about 8 people, a couple on sound and one was running a stealth plane with you'll notice the Land Rover is traveling along, and there's a drone flying above it. And so there was a drone there. So it was a big deal. And they got lots and lots and lots and lots of footage.
So you got to drive it, though, for the first time in about 60 years, right?
Well, the name of the guy that we were working with is Riley, Reilly, Riley. And he was very enthusiastic and very helpful. And I can email you the details if you want.
Please do.
Okay.
So what was it like to drive the truck after so long?
Yeah, of course, I've had power steering the last few years. Yeah. Old Land Rover, well, my mother could drive it, so it's a bit stiff. And then trying to shift the gears so they don't go was a bit of a challenge. Double clutching and all that. So I was actually the Land Rover, the Grizzly Torque, was left at my house here for a while before it got its transfer. So I drove it around Salt Spring a bit. Really great to be back in the old vehicle. It was amazing. And one thing that was amazing, how little room there was. I go in there and I try to push the seat back. Well, there's no way to push the seat back, or you're just crammed in there. No wonder Bob Bateman stood so often, because it was by the far the most comfortable way. I didn't mention that above the passenger seat, as you look towards the opening in the ceiling, there was a wall there, a bulkhead you may want to call it. And every time we ran over something, and we were running over quite a few things, Bob would put a painting of what it was. He had quite a few chickens painted up there with the one bicycle, which was crushed. And so there's a bicycle.
And a police dog, apparently.
And a police dog, and lots of millipedes and other creatures, 1 chameleon or 2 chameleons, and so on. And
so that's your journal of roadkill.
Yes. No, unfortunately, no one ever took a picture of it. Otherwise, Bob, what he could have anyhow, we could have guessed it and put them back on, but they never went back on.
Well, there's still time. You could do something, you know. Well, now it's time for new adventures, right? So there's chance for the new owners to put roadkill.
Well, there you go. We'll go out and mow down some fresh roadkill.
What happened when you no longer had the truck? I guess back in the '60s. What happened with your Rover interest then? Did you ever have another Land Rover except for the other one that you took to Nairobi?
Yeah, well, that was I kicked myself for not bringing that Land Rover from Nairobi back to Canada.
So it's
But
the one that got away.
it's still out there somewhere.
well, it's now pretty ancient. It's probably some scrapyard now. But maybe.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, well, it was special because it was a Dormobile, so it may be still alive. There's one running around Victoria near here, the town near here, a Dormobile Land Rover.
There's one in California that Terry Wickman owns, and she's now trying to get back on the road.
Yep. Except she lives in Arizona.
But the Grizzly Torque, the owner does not drive it out in the highway because not only is it too slow, but I guess it's such a huge investment, he doesn't want any damage with it. He puts in the back of a trailer and tows it.
The indignity.
Yeah, I mean, if he put in overdrive, he could get it up to maybe 60, and that's fine, but he doesn't want to mutilate the original.
That man needs to talk to Adam Bennett, owner of the Oxford truck. He's restored it at great expense, and he drives it everywhere.
Well, that's interesting. Well,
yeah, in fact, he surprised a bunch of folks. He went down to Italy for a car show, and they expected it to come on a transport and fully hermetically sealed. And up comes Adam Bennett driving the truck, and he gets out and shakes hands and says, "Here's the keys. Bring it back when you're done."
Wow. Well, that certainly is impressive. I'll mention it to Stuart.
Well, to be sure, Adam did not restore the truck like Grizzly Torque was restored. When he found the truck, he kept as much of the original truck as he found it when he rebuilt it. So there are the patina that the truck had, the state it was in from the I guess the 60s when it was stopped, and 70s when it was stopped being used, has been maintained. So there's pictures
right. That's more a preservation than a restoration.
Yes.
But I suspect it still cost him quite a bit.
Oh, I know it did. He had to have it transported from Ascension Island all the way back up to the UK, and he had it.
Wow.
He found the truck. He had it retrieved from Ascension Island, restored in 4 months.
It's another story, but I'm curious how he found it on Ascension Island.
Listen to our podcast. We talked to him for 2 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, episode 60. But you'll appreciate this detail. It ended up in Ascension Island after the first overland. They returned it to Rover, and then Rover gave the truck to a birdwatching society.
A birdwatching society, I'll be damned.
Yes.
So now we have two ex-birdwatching trucks on our show.
And
interesting.
And that was the Oxford truck that went on the first overland journey. It had gone back to Land Rover, and as Harold said, they then turned around and went on to another expedition. And this time it was bird watchers, and they were
the British Ornithological Society, I think they were.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds very good. Yep. But we tried to drive through Burma, right? I skipped over that, but we get down to the border of India and Burma. They wouldn't let us in, and we argued and tried to find a way around it. But it's been a bloody place for a long time and still is. Incredibly dysfunctional country with the military running it. So we weren't allowed to drive into Burma. And the Oxford-Cambridge, they had gone through just a few years before, very few years before.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the movies and they're going over these bridges from like Second World War, and they were so rotten that they were surely about to collapse. And so we could not do it. And we had to go down to Calcutta, and we got on a Japanese freighter for 3 days to go from Calcutta to Rangoon, and then up to Mandalay and over to northern Thailand and down to Singapore and so on. So we couldn't do, a few years later, what the Oxford-Cambridge expedition did.
Yeah,
I guess they were in the right place at the right time then.
Yeah.
Exactly.
At the sweet spot. Did anybody on your journey, especially the part that the first overland was on, did they mention the first overland or recognize it and say, "Oh, you guys are like doing it again"?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, entirely different route except
to that part.
Except India.
Getting my expeditions all confused, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you driving now?
Oh, which was a Land Rover. No, it's just a Forester.
Yeah.
Subaru.
It's okay, Harold. It's okay. It's okay.
All-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Oh, a nice car.
Yeah. Exactly. Did you?
Well, it's a nice road-going appliance, and we'll leave it at that.
Oh, that's a good one.
Aside from those two trucks, have you owned any other Land Rovers?
Yes. There's a point when I was back in Victoria on Vancouver Island, and I was feeling lonely for a Land Rover. So I bought I think it was a 6-cylinder, long wheelbase Land Rover, and kept it for a few years.
North American 109, late 60s.
That's 109, yes.
Inquiring minds need to know what was in the gin and tonic jerry cans.
Can you guess?
I'm going to say gasoline. I was hoping it was gin and tonic, but I'm guessing it was probably gasoline.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Yes, boring. Yes, you're right.
Very boring. Who wants that?
Did you have any trouble at border crossings? The Forest Overland guys were saying one time they were trying to enter a dry country and they had much trouble with their jerry cans labeled gin and vodka.
Well, we started off by landing in Ghana, and a fellow in England at the museum in London gave us some alcohol to pickle specimens. And so we as we had landed there, we were stupid enough. I was stupid enough to say, well, we've got all this equipment for specimens. And so they're poking around. What's this? What's that? And, well, that's alcohol. Oh, that's alcohol. So we had to pour it out. Funny, way back then. And so that was the end of that alcohol.
Yeah.
But as my father was in insurance, and he wrote various insurance people around the world. So we would call in to, say, Rangoon, and we'd be told to go see this insurance guy if we wanted. And they were always interested in us, and they'd give us a meal, and they gave us a case of Scotch whiskey. Well, that's pretty high octane stuff. And we stayed with people along the way who would befriend us, and we'd give them a bottle of Scotch as a thanks. So, yeah, I'm afraid those jerry cans were just gasoline.
Now you could have other jerry cans that are hidden, and they would have alcohol in them. No one would know. One
of the stipulations, my father helped me temporarily with the purchase of the vehicle. I paid him back when I made the money later on. But the agreement was that we had to type a letter every day, or we had to type a trip, not necessarily every day, but we had to keep a typed journal. And this we sent home to my father, and he had them retyped it, because we were typing on a bumpy road often, so it wasn't that great, but he had it retyped and bound into a book. So we have that
neat.
As a journal, as a book, yeah.
Is it still available, or was it ever available?
Well, it's sitting at my elbow here, but it never was published.
Oh, okay. Sounds like it.
But Tim Slesser has all the journals from the first Overland, and apparently you can ask Tim Slesser on such and such a date what happened, and he can give me a minute. He'd open the book, and okay, well, we were doing this, this, and this.
Well, I could do that. Yeah. As I say, the book's right beside me here.
Well, you should at least get that. I would suggest getting it scanned in and at least have some sort of copy made of it in case.
Well, we're talking about doing a book.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And as we have Bob Bateman's paintings, watercolors from the trip, and still pictures, and his.
I assure you, there's great interest in your story.
Yeah, that would sell.
Yeah, we're doing it. Well, I'm glad the world was the way it was back then. Try to do that now. You have so many problems and dangers, potentially.
Some things have gotten better and some things have gotten worse, haven't they?
I think you can drive across the Sahara easier from Algeria. That's easier.
Yes.
Yes, other things have got worse.
Yep. It's probably easier to drive across India now, less bumpy roads.
Well, no, the roads were a strip of cement down the middle, wide enough for one vehicle, with level dirt on either side. That was the average road. And so you'd be seeing a bus coming towards you. And at first you get right off the cement and you're into the dust. No, that's not the way to do it. You soon knew you keep two wheels, the left side on the road and the right side is in the dust. And the bus would go half off as well. So you learn by these things.
Now, there's a tip if you find yourself driving in the mid-50s in India, one wheel on the road, one wheel off the road.
Don't get off all the way, otherwise the bus won't move from the cement.
Ah, gotcha. So that's the signal. You move over, they move over, and then you guys pass, and it's not as much dust.
I believe that's what they call sharing the road.
Sharing the road, and Land Rovers are dusty.
Oh, yes. Yes, and they don't go fast.
I'm sure the new ones are hermetically sealed in.
They are. Oh, yes, they are. Yeah, as we discuss endlessly on the show, they look a lot alike, and they also look a lot like other vehicles on the road. It's tough to tell the difference anymore.
Exactly. And one wonders how rugged they are on really rugged country. Apparently they're good, but I don't know.
Yeah, they're usually decent. We haven't heard of many taking the trucks in the last, say, decade, really off-road anything too strenuous like an overland journey. But from what we hear, some of the newer ones can handle it, especially like a Discovery.
Yeah, I think so. Ask Stuart, he'll know.
Again, thanks, Bristol. Appreciate you telling your story and hearing about it.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you both.
Yes.
And it's been fun talking with you.
Good. It's been great talking with you. We're impressed that, talking to people that did amazing things, certainly back in the day, before
or did important things.
Or did important things. Exactly. It was just it's cool stuff. I'm glad you were available to talk to us.
Thank you both. Over and out.
And so that's the show for October 2018. I want to thank Bristol Foster for joining us to tell us all about the Grizzly Torque and his overlanding adventure. It seems like it was kind of a hidden story, but until just recently, it's interesting how first overland guys are more well-known, but the Grizzly Torque gentlemen did virtually the same thing and not as well-known. So it's good to get their story out.
Even though they have a cooler name, I think. Twisted Bear. And also, I want to thank, Erik and the guys at Lucky 8 for putting together the fundraiser to help Dave's family, to help keep them going.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Hopefully we'll see you at Rovers on the Rocks, too. Also, thanks to the One True Packs for his continued production support, making the show sound better and better, or at least just better. Maybe not better and better, but sound better. Visit our website, Centresteer.com, to listen to previous shows and for show notes, which have links to stories discussed in today's show. We're part of the 4x4 Radio Network, and I invite you to check out the other shows at 4x4radionetwork.com. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can directly support the show also at patreon.com/Centresteer in the British spelling, CENTRE. If you're not a subscriber to the show through a podcast app, I highly recommend you do so you get the show automatically when it is available. We always try to get it out before the first of the next month. If you're coming to Rovers on the Rocks, be sure to say hello to us. We'd be happy to show off the rebuilt Defender and sell you a podcast t-shirt. Thank you for listening to show number 67. I hope you enjoyed it. We'd love to hear from you and what you're up to in your Land Rover. Until next time, I ask you to share the show with one other Land Rover enthusiast.
And you may now resume your important things.
Let's pause the podcast here.